Right. I think we're getting there. We're recording. Give us a few seconds here. I've had some technical difficulties this morning, but I think I'm getting it going. I think I'm getting it going. Okay. I think are we live? Are we live? Did we get there? Yes, I do believe we are live on YouTube. Wonderful. Okay. So Bingo, if you can copy and paste this into the old one, that I'm not going to be getting onto. I'm going to have to send out the link to everyone as well. So just give me a few minutes here, everybody. There's the YouTube link. And now I'm going to have to go and send the actual link to everyone via email because no one will have gotten it because I had to change the link. We're in a different link right now. So I'm going to go into sent and I'm going to find my hash church. There it is. We'll go reply. Sorry, everyone. New link. Please come in here. All right. And then we'll go click, copy, and badoop, 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 badoop. That should be good. Sorry about that, everybody, but hey, better late than never. It was not going to open in the regular room for whatever it kept telling me I had the parameters wrong. And so this happens sometimes. I might have had the URL stream key or the other. There's a whole bunch of different things that need to be done when you do this. And I suspect I just did it a little wrong. So happy to see everyone here. Welcome. Give us a second as it's going to take a few minutes to get some folks into the room, but I have a lot of people hitting me up. We'll send you that link. There's Chimera, I believe. Oops, this is the link now. All right. Okay, let's see if we got anyone popping in here. No, yeah, no stress, Alex. That's because you're not me. Trust me, this is all stress. It's like literally all stress. You can't even imagine when it's 8:59 and you go live and it just says you don't have permission. And you're like, oh, okay. And got to go into the back end and open everything. Also, my mouse is dying. I have about 2% on my mouse. So a little bit of a stressful morning, but it's all good. We'll get through it. We'll get through it. Welcome, everyone. We got 116 people watching live right now. I went to bed very late last night and ate a lot of gummies, so I'm a little bit hungover. I'm not going to lie. I guess I could put these back on. Let's see what we got here. One second, Ryan. I'm going to hear you as soon as I change my speaker to something that can actually hear instead of a microphone. There we go. There we go. No, that's not what we want.
I am.
There you
What
go.
up, Kevin?
Morning.
Hey, good
Morning.
morning. Good morning, Ryan. Good morning, Kevin. How are you guys doing?
Good,
Doing
Marcus. How
well,
about
thanks.
yourself?
Well, I had a little bit of technical difficulties this morning, plus I'm all like, I ate a lot of gummies last night. I got higher than I thought I was going to. And I guess I woke up a little bit kind of hazy this morning. And then with the technical difficulties of YouTube telling me you can't stream, I was like, what the? Trying to figure it all out. But I'm good now. We're good. We had a pretty big landslide here in Lions Bay in my small community. We had a house get taken out by some mud and rock. I got a couple people here at my house this morning who are evacuated from their home because they're right below where this landslide came down, took out monster trees like they were nothing, and put like 50 of them right across the Sea to Sky Highway. So the highway up to Whistler has been closed for 24 hours, which is fairly unheard of. A lot of people travel up that highway, so
Wow. Lucky you didn't have
yeah.
too many people. No lives lost.
Well, you know what? I think there may have been, nothing's been said publicly, but I do believe a couple was in the house when it got taken out. So they're kind of looking for them and trying to figure that out. It hasn't really been publicized like in our community, but I do believe two people lost their lives.
That's horrible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
tragedy.
Yeah. It is definitely. Tragedy is a human necessity. It seems to give us perspective that is important that sometimes we forget about. And so it is what it is, and hopefully those families are, dealing with that. My father and my stepmother died tragically in a motorcycle accident, so I do know what it feels like to kind of get that call where you're just like, what happened? Like, what? Like, and then you just kind of, for me, I just collapsed. Very similar to the old Italian woman in all black at the funeral who jumps on the casket and is crying. That was me at my dad's funeral. It was, I'd never really been, I'd never experienced a death like that in my life. And it was definitely not something I'd wish upon people. Yet there was a value to it for certain. And my psychedelic use immediately became the foundation of me not melting down. I kind of got the idea of why people kind of need a religion or a faith of some type, because if you don't have the psychedelic experience and you don't realize that a soul can exist outside of a body, faith would probably be a close second that I would look for to have as a foundation to not otherwise you're melting. You're straight, they're going to melt your brain when these things occur. And I know Colin's going through it right now with his father, and I know my good buddy Robert Laurie, his father just passed away the other day in hospice. So it's part of this, this intense part of life. And it's interesting that today we're going to talk about breeding because, really what we are is breeders. We breed human beings and we come and we go. And hopefully we can, be cheerful while we're here. And I'm really stoked that you guys all decided to come on today. Kevin, very happy to have you, man. You're always prolific in your speaking and everyone loves to hear what you have to say. And Ryan Lee has, done so much in the world of growing, and to not mention Skunkman Sam would be ridiculous. Another gentleman that, geez, some of the quotes you've said over the years, Sam. I mean, when when Dr. Mark was talking about the trichome work, I can't remember his name, Paul something. He's like, oh, and you're just like casually like, oh yeah, I funded all his work. Almost thought it was a joke, but of course it wasn't.
That
So,
was Dr. Carl
Wahlberg.
Haley.
Oh,
right.
Hillig, yeah. Yeah.
Hillig, yes, of course. So
Was
welcome
Hillig at
everybody.
Malberg's lab? Was Hillig at Malberg's lab, Sam?
Absolutely correct.
Wow.
Rob was there first, and then after Rob had left, Hillig showed up and needed funding for his work, and I did it.
Yeah, that lab did some amazing stuff. It was at the University, Bloomington University in Indiana, I believe.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, it's kind of a shame he doesn't have the tools that exist today,
yeah.
but he did very good work with what he had, and besides funding the work, I also supplied a lot of the genetics that he tested when he came up with wide leaf drug, wide leaf hemp, narrow leaf drug, narrow leaf hemp, which is what I strongly believe in today.
Yeah, I'd love to see that work redone because when they were doing those populations, they really looked at they were doing the isozyme analysis, but they only used like one or two individuals from each population. And I think that really limited maybe what our understanding would have been. It would really be interesting to go back and redo that work with modern techniques and look at larger samples from each population that they used. I'm sure it wouldn't change the results too much, but it would just provide some more context into what the story that came out of that. And that was Mark Sheldon and I were talking about that last week. Malberg's lab, they did or was it the week before maybe? Malberg's lab, they did all these really interesting studies, and one of them was they took these glass pipettes and they stretched them out to these really fine point tips. And then they went and were digging into individual trichome heads to collect samples and then running those samples through I think it was a GC, wasn't it, Mark?
Yeah, well, yeah, they used GC. They also used HPLC. I mean, they were agnostic as to what analytical tools they were using. But yeah, I mean, I think Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, I think was a graduate student
Yeah.
in
Yes, he's a PhD now. Yes.
yeah, well, but back then when you funded him, it was during his graduate work, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
I went and visited him at Dr. Malberg's lab, and Malberg wanted to go fishing with me, but that was not what I
So
was there for.
in that online archive, I think we posted it the other episode when we talked about this, right? There's an online archive that some hemp
Oh my
um,
God, he showed up.
website that basically has open access to all his articles. If you go like the last three or four, Carl's a co-author on like all of that work towards the end. So, yeah, very important stuff.
And the other work that was really important was I think his grad student was named Sun or Sung.
It's a Korean guy. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. He did
Yeah.
fantastic work.
Yeah.
Well, and interestingly enough, Mark Lewis, who just jumped in the room, he did his engineering work not far from Bloomington, and he really believes that a lot of that there was plants that would develop legs and walk out of that DEA licensed lab and generally influence the cannabis culture in that part of the world and in that part of the state. Welcome, Mark. Nice to see you.
Hey man, how you doing?
Good. Welcome back to church.
Thanks. Thanks. I was waiting in the other room.
You figured it out.
Yeah, I made a mistake this morning and I'm not sure what exactly happened, but I had to start a
I,
new link.
Marcus, I even emailed you a few days ago and said, "Are you sure this is the right link?" And
It
you said,
was. It
"No."
was.
I
Yes,
clicked
it
on it.
was. I know. Let me try to explain this for you. So I go
Took me
into
to
my
another
email.
room.
I'll explain it to you. You'll understand in a very soon. So what you're thinking is when I send the emails for the Hash Church panelists, sometimes I go and find an old email from like last week, so I know the majority of the emails are in there because copying like 20 emails in is a pain in my ass. So what I do sometimes is I forward last week's email so it'll say the wrong number, like it'll say episode 18 or episode 17. Now, today, what happened was I did that, but that link was the right link. But when I went in to use that link today, it was glitching out and it wasn't working. So this morning, I had to create a new link about 5 minutes ago. And that's why you guys were in a different room. So, yes, you
Oh,
were in
oh
the
yeah,
wrong room, but
because
not the reason you thought.
yeah, it said that you were busy holding a different show someplace else,
Oh,
Yeah.
and
shit. And you're not invited.
that's no problem.
Dude,
Me,
you're totally invited.
me and Mark Lewis will go off and we'll have our own little hash powwow.
Listen, I think there's some heavy hitters in the room right now. So I mean, listen, the idea was breeding. I don't know if Ryan, you have some ideas in regards to sort of directing this conversation. I know there's going to be 4 hours of solid amazingness that comes out of it. And welcome Johnny B, who just popped into the room and looks like he's freshly done like 100 push-ups.
Wait a minute, Ryan. You don't have any children. You're not a real breeder, are you?
No, not at the moment. That's true.
Whereas me and Mark, we do have children.
Yeah.
Listen, there is
Me too,
a
bro.
village in northern Thailand that looks a lot like Ryan. I'm not gonna lie.
I've
That
never been to Thailand.
it's on the
I'm
hill.
joking. I'm so joking, dude.
Just for the
Oh my
record, I've never
God.
been to Asia. Um, yeah, I
Shit.
your email said, and I thought it was a really great context, a good place to kind of jump off the conversation, which is why I mentioned Mark and Kevin, was seeds versus clones, right? And how those two different types of propagules influence cultivation. And there's a lot of history in that conversation because we've ended up using clones because of the way cannabis has been over hybridized for years and years and years. And, up until recently, the only way to get to crop uniformity was to use clones, right? To get chemical stability. And some of the work that I did with Mark Lewis down in California was, probably some of the earliest work on towards getting towards chemical stability in a seed line. And in the last few years, Phylos and Refined Genetics, these guys have come a long way in creating actually stable seed lines. And so
Well,
we're
wait a minute. You say refined genetics is stable, but they don't use true uh, homogeneous parents to create their F1 hybrid so-called stable varieties.
Yeah, when I
They're,
say stable, I mean uniform is really what I
yeah,
meant.
they're using inbreeding to create almost homogeneous varieties. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, well, and that's the way that it's been typically done in corn is through inbreeding to create, either inbreds or recombinant inbreds that we then use to create F1 hybrids, right?
Well,
So
I remember
an F1
Dr.
hybrid, an
Dr.
F1 hybrid by
Boxa,
definition is not stable, but
yeah,
it's uniform, right?
Dr. Boxa
Yeah.
always told me, don't use inbreds. Every time you inbreed, you take away vigor, and so I'm a believer in what he said.
Yeah, and if you look at
But
IBL,
you
the
did
and
that.
what
I mean, you did do that in the creation of the propyl lines, right? Like you created those four inbred lines.
Yes, that's true. But what we also did was we restored all the vigor, which is what they hope that they're also doing. But they're not starting with homogeneous lines. We didn't start with absolutely homogeneous homozygote lines either. Excuse me. We because we only sold them 3 or 4 generations, and that's not enough to do it. If you want to have a true homozygote, you need to double a haploid or do some other trick.
Yeah, I mean,
I've
we're
never
split.
seen an IBL actually from like 50,000 seed population. I've never seen an IBL. I'm just going to throw this out there for the conversation that has ever resembled anything true to the form on the parent stock. I've seen
IBL is a silly term that we
more,
use. Yeah,
chasing of dreams than I've ever seen in my entire career. Chasing
yeah,
Well,
IBL.
the way I had described it was okay. So you take an IBL that's a cross between a white plant and a black plant. Neither one of those really exists, but regardless. Uh, and then you back cross it to either the white one or the black one for 3, 4 more generations. But you're never going to get a black parent. You're never going to get a white parent. You're going to
right.
end up with yeah, you understand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, but
Listen. We
yeah,
use the term IBL in the cannabis world in a really silly way.
yes,
IBL means inbred line. It could be
right,
inbred one generation or it could be inbred 10 generations,
yep,
right? And you end up with different things along the way.
that's
When we
right.
say homozygous, we really mean at multiple traits in the genome. Like we're starting to fix traits along the way. And the farther down we go the line, the more homozygous it becomes. Like if you self a plant, every generation you get 50% more homozygosity through the process of selfing subsequent generations, right? And one good example of this is when Sam sent the skunk over to the University of Mississippi, they inbred it for a whole bunch of more generations, 1 to 1, 1 to 1, 1 to 1, and eventually they got to a state that they called isozygous. Isozygous just means the same on both chromosomes, and that's approaching what you'd get from
Yeah,
like a doubled
that's
haploid.
Mhm.
that's true. And I did it on a family line level in California for 10 years before I brought it to Holland. And then I used clones to reproduce the seeds. And the people, like when I sent those to Dr. Voxa, he also told me that they were, oh no, it was a cytology lab we did it, that they were more homozygote than any of the registered hemp varieties that exist in the world. That's
Right,
skunk number one.
because those things have been also bred on a population level, right? And,
Exactly.
and this comes back to this inbreeding conversation. When you inbreed cannabis, cannabis is an obligate outcrosser like humans. Okay, so when you breed two plants together, they each have their own variation in the family heritage that is essentially replicated, right? And it's a very unnatural process to breed brother to sister, brother to sister, brother to sister over a series of generations. And in humans, you
Yeah.
just can't do that, right? You end up getting all these weird, defects in the children, and that's because there's this really high genetic load of um, defective alleles, or what we call lethal alleles. And so essentially we have these built-in genetic mistakes in all of our genomes, right? And cannabis is no different. And when you start putting them into this inbreeding process that's quite unnatural to cannabis, you start uncovering all of these traits. So they start pairing up in a homozygous form, and you end up with like really bad performing plants or plants that just start getting weak, which is why Boxka would say don't inbreed, right? But it's again, it's a means to an end. If you're inbreeding with the intention to outcross at the end, that's how you can restore vigor. So, um,
As
corn went
as
through
long as the ones that at the end you combine to restore the vigor have different
exactly.
backgrounds, that really helps.
Yeah.
So
What
what
did
I want
what
to
did DJ
ask
what did
the
DJ
group,
Short do in all of this? Like, wasn't he inbreeding and mute
yeah.
and finding mutants? Can you explain a little bit about how he went about that? Because it always seemed to work out in his favor.
Well, it didn't. It didn't. I mean, anybody that's grown blueberry would really say that it's not a very high performing plant. It's got
Right.
all these weird crinkle leaves mutations in the leaf, and it's a slow growing plant, and it doesn't yield very much. And when you outcross it to a bunch of different lines, like we did in our hybrid, in our joint projects, that the outcross is actually way outperformed the blueberry, right? And it's actually a really good example of what we call inbreeding depression, right? This genetic weakness that gets built into these lines as you go throughout the inbreeding process. And Mark, you've done a lot of work on this. I'm sure you've seen it to some degree in your work as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know if you know, but we've been focusing really hardcore on type threes for the past few years. Like not a lot of not a lot of action on the type one side for genetics these days, because everybody has a tendency not to respect contracts. But on the type three side, we took the propal 3Vs and we inbred them by terp profile. So we have, about 12 inbred lines that are S3 or deeper now, and same on the pentyl side. So when you pair those terp cassettes up, you get your hybrid vigor back. And you get like twice the oil, because you'll watch your oil start depressing. Like, that first integration step, you'll have like 3-4% oil. And then as you inbreed, the total oil just keeps going down. But you lock in the terp cassette, and then when you bring it back to the pentyl, you get that hybrid vigor
Yeah,
back.
and that's exactly what we did for cannabinoids.
And the same, there's a place in Europe called the Crag. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they do a lot of genetic work. And they were saying that it only takes three inbred steps in different directions to be able to create a hybrid with hybrid vigor. So S3 one way and an S3 the other way, and then you can bring them back
We,
together.
we did it to 3, 4. I think we made a few that were 5 self generations. And after 3 or 4, they're most of them were functionally sterile. They would have viable pollen, but it was sticky and it wouldn't adhere, it wouldn't drop. So you had to use a Q-tip to make uh, hybrids with it or selfing.
yeah, and they went through this with corn, right? Because corn or maize was also an outcrosser. Um, and essentially, it's one of these things where through selfing many different individuals from a population, there's going to be some very small subset of plants that have less deleterious alleles. And so you can actually go through this selfing process with thousands of different plants, which is difficult in cannabis because you have to
With
use.
with corn, if I'm remembered correctly, their primary tool to get around a lot of this was they were using true sterile males.
Yeah, but that had a whole bunch of consequences as well, genetic weaknesses. And when you're using sterile males like that, you're by definition outcrossing, right?
No,
Corn
but
is a
it does make the breeding work fast because otherwise you have to detassel the corn. It's a lot
well,
of
it
extra.
makes yeah, it makes the seed production work easier in the hybrid
Yeah,
for the
that's what I
hybrids.
mean.
Yeah. And it's a difficulty with cannabis, like, Arabidopsis, for example, the way that the flower morphology is, if you grow, like you can make a cross, or you can expose plants to like a mutagen, for example, like EMS or X-ray or whatever you're using, gamma ray, and you grow out all the seeds. And just by letting the plants grow, they individually self-fertilize, right? You don't have to go into every single plant and spray the chemical or spray STS on a plant to make it self, which is an extra step that we have to do that really complicates the process in cannabis. So if you grow 1,000 individuals from a cross in Arabidopsis, and then you harvest the seeds individually from each one of those 1,000 plants, you now have 1,000 like F2 or segregating generation families, right? So it's an extra step that you have to do in cannabis and in the inbreeding process that makes it a little bit more difficult.
And do you enjoy smoking a Dabbleropolis?
No, I don't smoke or grow those
Right.
plants, but they, it's just to point out the difference of the breeding system and how that breeding system affects the way that we breed. And corn, like you were saying, you've got the ears and then you've got the tassel up top, which is really the pollen donor. You can think of it that way. They're kind of built to self in a way that is, different than the way we do it with cannabis. So
Yeah.
we want to
For
apply that same
example, when
technique.
you have S, uh, what they call SU, the sugar genes, where the kernels, when they dry, they shrink up and get all wrinkly and stuff. Uh, the super sweet ones, if you don't keep them isolated, then the corn that you grow will not be super sweet. It has to be pollinated by a super sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's just a different allele that's contaminating the process, right? And
Exactly.
again, because it kind of outcrosses it. Corn's a weird one, because the pollen is not really super, it's not what we call anemophilous. It doesn't flow in the wind. The pollen doesn't flow in the wind, but the pollen kind of drops on an angle away from the tassel. So the plants beside it will have a little bit of outcrossing. Anyway, the point that I was trying to make is that, like, it's one of these examples where, like, the only way out is through, right? Like, you have to kind of do this, like, brute force breeding approach where you screen through thousands and thousands of self individuals to find those very few plants that don't have the deleterious alleles. And that process of doing that purges the genome of the population of these deleterious alleles, and what we get out on the other end is these inbred plants that are way more suited for future breeding and future outcrossing. So we're getting to that point in cannabis. It's a journey, of course, as all breeding is, but
Yeah,
yeah, it's a journey. And the reason that we do this stuff is, like, this is not necessarily about finding new things. Like, with the way that we outcross now, and we're constantly crossing this to that and sifting, thousands of plants collectively every year, we do find a lot of new things, but we don't end up with true breeding varieties or uniform varieties for production. And companies like Napro and Mark, with, helping their cultivators do this process, it's about taking these unique chemotypes and phenotypes that we found and putting them into a stable form that is more suited for agriculture. Because, as we've come to learn, planting crops from seeds is better than planting crops from clones, right? The plants just perform better. That having that taproot come off the seed, and the way that root formation happens, is very different from how a clone roots. And how when you plug a clone, the root architecture really tends to stay along the surface of the soil. But when you plug a seed, that taproot dries down into the soil. Um,
when I bred skunk number one, we used to pull the plants up, and we would take the individual ones that we were going to save as a clone that had the most biggest, largest. That they were from clones, or well, actually they were from seeds, but we were picking the ones that had the most largest ball of roots and really fine roots. I almost think that if a clone has enough really, really fine roots, it's just as good as a big taproot.
One thing, guys, I want to just kind of pop in. I sent Marcus a text, and I was just thinking about, the concept of single nucleotide polymorphisms and how that plays like such a crazy role in where we select and how and what we select towards. And it's almost as if we don't quite have the full picture, because if you look at single nucleotide polymorphisms, it's a Rubik's cube that constantly changes on you, right? And I think that's at the end of the day, from looking at many varietals and cultivars across many spectrums and many years, it starts to tell it. This is I landed on this over the 2 years ago, just in this concept of we really have to go deeper here to really try to pair these things because we're just every time you get a step forward, it's almost like you're trying to keep a straight line that wiggles a little bit and it just gets even more wiggly. Um, so I think there's more work that needs to be done there to better understand how we can pair things in a more intentional way. Because I feel like we're still here at this place of touch, feel, smell with a little bit of insight on the inside of what's happening, and we're starting to really understand it. But it's quite honestly, I think we've still got a ways to go. Although we've made such amazing strides, it's very clear when you look at the S&Ps that we're kind of still way out there in the ether. I don't know how anyone else feels about that or if they're studying this or looking at that, but I just thought for the sake of the conversation, it'd be great to hear Kev's thoughts and, Mark, if you're looking at this type of stuff, it sounds like you have based on, the work that you're doing. You said two words that were very key to me that kind of made me believe that you understand this. But it's such a really deep conversation that gets in the weeds quickly, at least for myself. That I just wanted to bring it up with the group and hear your thoughts because it's really a fascinating subject to me. As I said, it's the Rubik's cube that keeps changing and new colors appear, and it's nuts. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I don't know about keeps changing because, you know, you could pretty quickly screen for different terp synthases now, obviously THCA synthase and all that stuff. And, we got TPS gene screens. We're looking at height and width SNPs. So there's a lot of cool stuff out there. I think we're just adding to it. The Rubik's Cube just keeps getting more colors, like you said. I don't know how much they change,
Yeah,
but
that's better use of terms. Like I guess we're expanding, right? And as we expand, I guess I'm looking at it as a change. It's more of an evolution, I guess is the better term for it. But
I
yeah.
used to kind of like until about, I don't know, 8 months, a year ago, I used to poo-poo a lot of people's genomic work with cannabis because I really didn't have confidence in most of the people doing the work. But since then, we've collaborated with the Salk Institute, and then, they did the pangenome study, and work with a great molecular biologist now who's just he's super sick and he develops, his own markers, and it's moving fast now, like you said, and
I,
it's just
I have a
important.
question for you, Mark. Do you think that, well, do you know, is there a THCP synthase?
Ooh, I don't know about that. I have to ask my buddy. We haven't really got into the super THC because I'm over in the hemp world all the time, Dave.
It's not
Well,
that's
actually,
upstream.
I'm with the slaves and the women.
The THCP that they did find in Italy was in a hemp variety.
Uh-huh. But yeah, we don't see a whole lot of we're not going that route. We're focused really hardcore on the essential oils, because we provide the genetics to terpene belt farms and what they're doing out there in Byron with their essential
Well,
oil.
I can honestly say that w- we had enough trouble breeding for the cannabinoids, which was relatively straightforward and easy. But the terpenes, yeah, I mean when I tried to breed for the terpenes, it was over my head, to be honest. It's so hard compared to cannabinoid breeding.
What's really cool is when you start, when you find things that produce both D and L, like limonene, because you usually don't see both, or you only get the one that smells musty, not the one that smells lemony. So that's where it starts getting really tricky. And then the downstream products from, if you're producing, you know, like a pinene, and then you have the downstream isoprenes and what they go to form and how some plants can have every terpene synthase present, but they're only producing, terpenoline and myrcene, which
That's what I was finding. And yeah, it was like banging my head against a wall.
yeah, and then you'll have a plant that only shows like three terpene synthases, but the whole rainbow's on the phytofact. So it's like an
Well,
interest.
yeah, Sam, you also didn't have the assay that we had at NAPRO, right? Like NAPRO was the first company to really start quantifying terps in that way. And that this was 20 years after you were doing that work, or
No,
15.
we were using a simple gas chromatography with so we were using GCFID, and so we could see the absolute amounts. But yeah, and one thing I will admit that when I made simple crosses between like a skunk variety or a Thai variety or an Afghan variety, I was shocked how easy it was that if I didn't know what the varieties were, so double blind testing, I could match the parents and the progeny just by their terpene profiles. It blew my mind how accurate I was.
Yeah,
I
I
can
know
only
that.
imagine at that point in time, like that epiphany of being able to see a little bit further, that early. It must have been just a light, a shot of light, a lightning bolt to your body. Um,
Well, we what we were doing was we were trying to look at the different terpenes and how they modulated or potentiated THC. So we were really looking at the recreational values of them more than anything else.
it's amazing. I mean, even today, I mean, the fact that we're at this place with technology and now we have machine learning and AI coming into the mix, we have all these things that and tools that could really help further simplistic studies that can go quite far and really help lend a hand in some of this stuff because the gaping gap I think here is really research, in terms of like spend. How much money is there to actually spend on a said singular thing that you're studying? And I know Mark, shout out Dr. Mark, you've done a lot of this grant work, but in terms of genomics, how do we tie all this together? Because we seemingly take these chemical constituents after the fact and then take them into a lab and then we create all these products. But I always wondered what happens if we kept it cultivar specific all the way through to a said product. And maybe that's one, like Kevin, when I first met you at Phylos years ago, we talked about LA Pure Kush for neurological disease and how, for reasons, for personal reasons for my dad and other patients that I work with, I was really, just a light bulb went off, right? And I'm thinking to myself, well, if we know those things work, how do we capture that and continue to help those work for product, right? Because we have it in this one modality, but how does that continue for a patient? And it seems like genomics is the first point of contact that we kind of, we utilize it, but we don't lean heavily into it as much as I believe we may could and should. Um, because they're tools, these are tools in the tool chest. They're screwdrivers and different types of screwdrivers, right? And hammers and nails, etc. So how do we utilize that further in terms of genomic research and then outcrossing? And what does that look like in a world of F1s and moving super fast? Mark, you see it every day in your work. You're being asked to make flavors every second, right? To, company product. But how does that get tied into an overall conversation of wellness, and how does the plant, from a wellness and health point of view, how does that stay together? How does genetics become a more important aspect to product dev?
Apologies, but I kicked the ball on wellness a long time ago. I'm looking for commercial viability at this point in my career. So
Yeah.
I'll let the doctors and physicians and all those folks, homeopaths, figure out what the wellness is. I know that the more research I do, the less I consume. That's all. That's all. All I know. Don't want a panic attack, Ryan. Remember?
Yeah.
That really became our ethos, and we were lucky to be working with folks like Ethan. But you know, everybody wants to do it all, from genetics to just like treating the patients, and that's just not the way it works. Like the plant people, we make the plants. Let's let the doctors figure out what works, right? Because these are like the genetics is the therapeutic aspects in the medicine. That's a deep hairball, right? And it's like it's kind of egotistical to think that we can do it all from seed to cure, right? And we were a plant research company, right? And so we would develop the plants and find the new things and be really diving deep and focused on what are the new smells, what are the new flavors, how do the traits inherit, how do we stabilize, like Mark was saying, propels versus pentals and yield metrics and all these other things. And then we'd pass the torch, right? We'd hand the baton down to the doctors and let them figure it out. Because that's what they do, right?
Also, you're much stronger as a team. You know, like you say, you can't, each person can't do everything. And Ethan doesn't try to do plant breeding. Uh, so, yeah, as a team, we're always stronger.
If I can throw something, the issue though is that the doctors don't actually have the data set because they don't have patient access. And so that's how I got involved with all these different physicians, was that from dispensary ownership, you see a population that no physician sees. And so it's really trying to record what varieties seem to be used predominantly by people with what issues. And then it starts to create clusters. And that's kind of where, like what Colin brought up with that LA Pure Kush, there was an accident. There was a patient that came in that had neurological problems, and there was no cannabis for him that was available at the store for free, right? So the compassion program was dry. But I used to always keep flour in my office in case that happened. And it was my own flour. And so I provided to him something that I consume. And he came back and said, hey, I had this profound experience consuming it. And so we tried it again to see, did it work again? And it did. And then it became this process of, can we find substitutes that are similar? And they did not work. So we said, okay, for you as a specificity, this thing works in this capacity. So once we had that, we started to say, well, maybe does it work for other individuals with the same condition? And we started to, apply it in that sense. And pretty soon we had a pretty good data set that said this product seems to have the ability to alleviate these issues specifically. And that's, I think, the issue of that plant breeders breed. And I'm not a healer. So I have no medical background. I just had this unbelievable number of people come through my hands over the course of, 18 years of dispensary operations. And it's that there's this disconnect between what the people at the store see and what doctors actually see, because they see these minority populations. And so we never get this chance to be able to say, this is the things we would like to see. And the breeders help steer these directions.
Yeah.
And then subsequently, we notice that these things work for individuals. Can the breeders get that and start to identify where on the loci is this trait? How do we intensify the population?
Yeah, you're finding the trailheads, right? That's what it is the crossovers. You're finding the trailheads, but we're not exploring the trail. That needs to be done by the doctors and the professionals. I mean, I don't know if you know Dr. David Mieri in Israel. He did this really interesting work on CBD. They were doing CBD extracts for children with epilepsy, and they had it narrowed down again. Like the plant folks kind of narrowed it down to CBD and said, "Hey, let's give this CBD to these kids." And so they had these CBD plants over in Israel, and they were producing them and making extracts for them. And as you know, as they do, you do it in batches, right? You do it like you get flowers every harvest, and you make a batch of product. And they made an extract and they started giving it to the kids, and the kids weren't responding the way that they anticipated that they would be finding. And so David Muir, I mean, you and I talked about this on another podcast a long time ago, but it's like the level of depth of analysis that they do on these extracts is so much greater than your average cannabinoid profile in North America. And they actually broke it down way further, and they found that there was another like minor subcannabinoid that it wasn't being produced at certain seasons in these CBD plants. And when that cannabinoid was missing, the kids weren't having the same relief as they were from the CBD extract, right? So whether that acted in conjunction or it was the single cause, again, that's really up to a clinical trial to tease apart those two variables. Um, but my point is like although we do play a role, there's so much going on a much deeper level that really takes a medicinal scientist running a clinical trial to be able to actually tease apart those variables because we just don't have that kind of granularity in our understanding or our analysis to actually really make those conclusions, right? And I think we do end up making a lot of wrong conclusions when we try to think, hey, we can do it all. I mean, the amount of times that I've heard cannabis people say, oh, I cured this person's cancer. It's just like, man, I hate hearing that. Like, it's just like, it's so egotistical. You didn't cure shit, right? It's like you provided this person medicine, and that's really honorable.
Mhm.
But like, let's not take the power from the plant, right? Like, it's the plant that's doing the healing. It's not us. We're just the vehicle.
That's not what
So,
makes you feel good when you're helping people either. You know, when you want to help people, it's not, you don't need to take any. I'm also the same way, Ryan. It rubs me the wrong way when I hear people say like, "Oh, my medicine that I make has," I'm like, "Listen, people have made this shit with toxic solvents and it's still shrunken cancers out of people's bodies. So don't you be taking credit. What you should take credit for is that you're using your journey to help others. That's amazing. I mean, who
yeah.
feels better? I don't feel better on Hash Church than when I listen to Wade talk about giving medicine to catastrophically ill children with Forrest. And he's crying when he's saying it because he can't even say it without crying. And he's not taking credit. He's saying, I feel blessed to be in this situation, to be able to share this with these children. And I think that's what people are missing when they try to take credit for, oh, my salve is the one. If you put it on your skin, it'll cure your skin cancer or whatnot. I've had many experiences. I have to admit, similar to Kevin, so many people have come to me over the years in regards to, you know, looking how cannabis can be used as a medicine for them. And I remember one time, in fact, Allison Gordon and MJ Dakota invited me out to Toronto, and I spoke at this event called Rethink Breast Cancer. And of course, I'm not a doctor. Obviously, I'm not. I have no. No, I'm on the panel with all doctors, and there's like four of them, and the entire audience are women in like stage 3 and 4 of breast cancer. So most of them had bald heads. They had the little material over their heads covering their heads, and they were sunken eyes. And you could. It was heavy. It was really fucking heavy. And one woman stood up and she's basically just looking for hope. She's just looking for a little hope. She's looking for one of those trailheads that you were talking about. And she asked the doctor, I've seen so much information. Can you just tell me yes or no? Is it possible that cannabis has the power to shrink cancer? That's all I want to know. And then the doctor gives her this runaround answer. Well, you know, we can't say that. And she goes into the realm of protecting her license. And I was just like, oh my God, like, of course we can say that. Like, haven't you read the studies? Like, Dr. Christina Sanchez and Guzman out of Madrid, like apoptosis, like, it doesn't mean it happens every time, but it definitely shows that it can happen. You can tell them that. You should be able to tell them that. They couldn't, none of them. So I grabbed the microphone and I ended up telling them. And then that woman was a woman who I ended up meeting in the parking lot later. I said, listen, I have cannabis products. You can have them all. I gave them all to her. You know, I'm speaking with Allison later that night, and she's just kind of crying. She's like, Mark, I know you're trying to help them. You don't understand. Like, it's such a high percentage. So many of those women are going to pass away in a very short period of time. And I was like, well, whatever, you know, if I can help one, that's something. I gave her all the hash and products that I had in my trunk and ended up sending her some other products, you know, just to kind of get her into that trailhead This was, some years before legalization here in Canada. Anyway, she is still alive to this day. And she was in like stage 4. This was like 10 years ago. So shout out to Judith if you're listening. It was great to meet you, and
Well,
I'm not sure really where I was
that's
going with that, but
Marcus, that's kind of the tie-in that I'm getting. That's why I brought that up, is because there's a I think there's two different ideologies here. Like I understand Ryan, like yes, they are the experts, but there's also you're an expert in a certain subject matter, and you may have spent your whole clinical career in college and going and doing these other studies and learning about all these other chemical constituents and monomolecular studies and all these things. But then you get this Rubik's Cube put in front of you that has all these different touch points, and you have to not relearn, but you have to adapt these new chemical profiles to all of the pharmacology that you've learned. And I think there's only a few still to this day that have the maturity to not let the ego get in the way in terms of what, you know, Marcus kind of touched on. Well, I can't risk my career over telling telling this person about this, these helpful things. I think there's a problem inherently with that, and I think that's where we need to break down the barriers and get the right people together so we can, like you just said, well, if the varietal is not grown a specific way and we don't understand, how to grow it seasonally, or it's happening every other season, can we inform the cultivators from a genomic research point, and then that can trickle its way down to then bring the right constituents in so we can have the better, healthier conversation that doesn't have fear baked into it based on a system that doesn't truly support what we're after here, which is
or
trying
or
to
worse, Colin, not just fear, it's the theft of hope.
right,
It's like, what's the Hippocratic Oath? Like, it's to do no harm. Well, then you can't
right.
steal hope from terminally ill people. You,
Yeah.
you have to you have to give them hope. I would love to hear from Wade. He just put his hand up. Welcome, Wade. You're looking good this week.
Yeah, I had to turn off my headphones. Can y'all hear me okay?
Perfect. Perfect.
Thank you. That was a beautiful story you shared, Marcus. It reminded me of some folks I know. And part of where I found solace in the dilemma that we're talking about here is, yes, cannabis does seem to help some people with cancer that is pretty hard on their bodies and their souls. And I think it's really important to remind everybody that that person, that patient, if you will, is dealing with a whole bunch of things besides their diagnosis. And cannabis, there's no question in my mind, and I think for anyone else here, that the right chemistry at the right dose, the right way of taking it into their body will give them a better quality of life. And hello, why not give someone a better quality of life while they're in the midst of dying? Because I got to tell you, that's a path every human being will walk at some point. Every one of us. It's the price of admission to life. So anything you or I or any other person can do in providing appropriate cannabis products to a person with a terminal diagnosis, you're doing good work. That's just
Well,
Wade's opinion, and I'll leave it
nothing
at that.
feels
Thank you.
better. Nothing feels better than helping someone on their journey, and I've done a lot of that throughout the years. Many people. Um, when people call me up and they say, "Hey, I need something for my friend," you just give it to them, right? Like you give them whatever you have, and you do it willingly, and there's honestly, it feels way better than selling pounds or getting a big paycheck. Like there's nothing like it on the planet. It was going on a couple of weeks ago about being of service to other people. It's one of the real gifts that we get to have in this industry, is to make other people's lives better.
Years ago, I was up at the Groningen Drug Center for Research, and I went to the hospital there um, because my wife was getting a liver transplant at the time, and I ran into a well, she wasn't a young lady, but a middle-aged lady who she saw me and understood that I was there working with cannabis, and she says, "Can you get me some cannabis?" Because she was uh, she was dying of pancreatic cancer, which is not only really, really difficult to beat, but it's one of the most painful deaths that can you can go through. And so, I mean, my company, we're breeding all these unique varieties of cannabis and everything. And what I did was I found her some cannabis the next day or two. I brought it to her, and a few days later I saw her, and she just says, "Oh, I want to thank you." I says, "Well, it's not going to be a cure." And she goes, "Yes, but what it does is it lifts my pain, me above the pain. So I don't have the pain, uh, just driving me down." And so she was able to, you know, uh, lift her spirits above the pain. And we as a company, we never dealt with patients that much. We were a medical research and development company, but what our end goal was to, because this was uh, in the early 90s, was to bring cannabis back into Western medicine because it was not there at that time. And I think we were very successful at that, which helped a lot of patients further down the line.
Absolutely. I would add that, this sort of conversation about, the cannabis people trying to, turn people on and to get them the information. And then doctors, obviously, it would be great if scientists and doctors were able to travel deeper down those rabbit holes and do studies. There's such an important factor. And I remember it when it was, I think it was uh, Colton's mom, Wendy, who was on here. And I was like, what do you think of this? Like, kind of all these, alternative folks and hippies and trippers and freaks, the ones of us that have been, holding this plant. And she just so honestly was like, oh my goodness, I love and pray for all of them. Like they were the keepers of this plant that brought it through prohibition so that when Colton got sick, he could access it to it. And I just thought, what a powerful statement that it's just people like us who absolutely love cannabis and we go super deep down this rabbit hole, whether it's through breeding or growing or processing or whatever it is. We get together, we talk about it for hours on end. And it does seem that there is a correlation for those of us that find the best products we can, the best, hashes and cultivars and all of these things. It correlates to the fact that we also end up being the people that give those products to anyone we bump into who we find out is sick or so and so's mom or uncle or cousin, whatever it is. You find that product for them right away and you give them the product that is your product. It's the stuff that is your head stash. There's something very correlated between a super head stash and a medical patient. There's no better product because when you try to, grow mediocre flour like they did in Mississippi, and not really acknowledge that it's a medicine. It seems like the groups that are trying to produce medical cannabis, or at least that have tried to produce medical cannabis over the years, have just been missing a component. And I don't know if that's, a high level of volatile organic compounds or if it's somehow the component of love.
Yeah, no, I want to say something, but before I jump on it, um, Ryan had brought up the seasonality of specific metabolite compounds being created in cannabis, resulting in different CBD delivery and efficacy for the kids. I just learned that applies to tea. That I went to high tea last night that Nick T had put on, and there was a group that work in China doing tea harvest, and he was talking about that the Chinese had noticed over millennia that the tea that they harvest in certain times of the year imparts specific effects that match that. So spring tea is more energizing, fall tea more relaxing. And it was just interesting to me because, if you don't have to be a scientist if you have 2,000 years, you are a scientist. You're able to look at 2,000 years of combined information. And it was just so interesting because it applies to, when Ryan brought it up with cannabis, I was like, whoa, what an interesting thing that so many plants have that seasonality of production. But with medical cannabis, because I had no background in medicine and I had no background in holistic healing, what I learned from when I was in the military, doing the work in the military, when people are terrified, if you're not, they calm down. And so the people that came into my life that were in medical cannabis, they were receiving good product, but what I think they received was a minute level of support that they didn't feel they received from the medical system. So the medical system, by virtue of the fact that those people have to disconnect from the patient in order to be objective, we who aren't in the medical system don't know how to disconnect. And so our involvement and engagement with them was, here's product, but here's also friendship. Here's emotional support. If you need access into anything we have, you can get at it, because if we can only get 5% increase in the quality of your existence, that's a big damn deal. And I think that has the value because it's the empowerment of the individual struggling that lets them do it. It's that same deal where you throw a rat in a tank and they swim for 30 minutes and then they drown. But if you pull them out of the water before they drown and you put them in a tank, they can swim for 2 days, because what they've developed now is belief. They believe that if they struggle long enough, they'll make it. And so I think that that's really the success that we had with medical people, was that we didn't approach it from the same perspective, because what we knew was that I'm not qualified to tell you if you're going to live or not. But what I know is I can tell you that we're not going to abandon you in your struggle. And cannabis is this conduit that creates that connection between the people who support and the people who need the support. And so I think that that's really, when you look at like the history of medical cannabis in the Bay Area, a lot of the product that was being given to the medical people was basically commercial pot, because they were giving it away. It wasn't ultra high level cannabis that they were receiving. It was the fact that they were receiving cannabis, which stimulated a response, and they were receiving support, which keeps the human element healthy. And that's, what Wade had said, the duality of it, where you're providing and you're also supporting. I think that that's like an intangible that you can't measure. And I think that that's what makes holistic medicine with cannabis so powerful, and it makes it so difficult for the doctors to understand, because they only provide the support through the medicine. They don't provide it through the human.
I just wanted to mention too, I think it was Marcus that was talking about the cannabis being grown at Mississippi State. 2 points. Number one is Dr. Osole believed in medical cannabis absolutely. Point number two was that they were given a contract by the NIDA, and they had to fulfill their contract. The NID wanted XYZ amount of cannabis of a certain variety with certain potency and blah, blah, blah. So it wasn't up to Dr. Sole to decide what to give them. It was, by contract. He personally developed a THC suppository, and he tested it on himself, and he believed in it. He knew it worked, and I think he really did want to do a better job, but it was beyond what he was contracted to do.
You're working for the federal government. You're kind of narrow focus, especially during the drug war. Any information that contradicted the agenda was basically buried.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is there a lot of research that has had a predetermined, and Sam, maybe you know this or maybe you don't, that have had a predetermined ask before it began? Because we all know that in the corporate world, that happens all the time. So, you know,
Well, when
Well,
you write a grant, you have to
in
design the
the
experiment, and the whole point is you have a problem you're solving. So all research is predetermined. I mean, that's kind of the way of science.
yeah, but
well,
I'm saying what I'm getting at is like, hey guys, like do this research, but we need to tell the general public a narrative over here.
well,
Like that kind of stuff. More of a dark
what
control um than that, Mark Lewis.
what the
Not
NIDA was doing basically in the early years was they were not allowing or funding any research that was going to help medical patients. What they were doing was looking for things that was bad about cannabis.
right.
Uh,
That's my question really. Is
yeah,
that
and that's absolutely was the truth
okay?
until it what really changed it was when it started being used by a lot of patients and also when different funding of the research started coming along besides the NIDA. And also, I think I've said this before, but Dr. Abrams at the in San Francisco, who was doing work with smoked cannabis for AIDS patients to help them stimulate appetite and things like that. He applied 3 or 4 times and was knocked back by the NIDA. They wouldn't let him do the work. And I suggested to him, what you need to do is apply for a grant and permission to do the work, but word it in a way that you're looking for something bad, why cannabis shouldn't be used, and then just find out and report the truth. And that's what he did. And he was funded, and he did get the grant, and he didn't find anything bad about cannabis, but he was able to report that it really helped AIDS patients a lot, stimulating their appetite, and it wasn't causing problems.
Yeah, I thought his best work was with opiates and how you could co-administer THC with opiates and you'd only have to take half the effective dose and you got the same amount of relief. That was a pretty cool study.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And that's what the gal who was up in Groningen Hospital when I gave her some cannabis to help her. That's the thing she told me. She goes, you know, with cannabis, I only take half as much of the because she was on a, a self-administered opiate morphine drip or something like that, and she, the trouble with that is that these drugs you have to keep taking more and more and more and more to get the same results. And if you can delay that with cannabis by only using half as much opiates, then you're going to have, twice as long before you reach that point.
Yeah, it's
Johnny
funny because
B. Oh,
oh,
sorry, Johnny B had his hand up.
Yeah, I just put my hand up. I didn't want to cut everybody off, but as we're talking here for about medical patients and everything is about medical, and that's just always my take on things. And as we're discussing that, my new book just came out from Pharma to Freedom, and chapter 8 is talking about a lot of what we're talking here because this is about for medical patients. It's 99 cents on Amazon right now on Kindle. I'm just plugging myself right now, but a lot of stuff we're talking about in here is actually I've been writing my story and how we can take a look at the systems and look at advocacies and how we can actually public awareness campaigns and stuff like that. So everything we're talking about here I actually wrote in a book, and all the stuff I've learned from you guys from House Church, the last 20, 30 years, a lot of that's in this little book here right now. So just want to say, I love you guys, and this just resonates with me so much. So just keep kind of advocating and pushing that, and we got to write more and do more for people out here because it's really important that we get this information out there in any which way we can possible between groups and leadership groups and writing and stuff like that. So yeah, as we're talking about it, I'm sitting here like in tears a little bit. So I just wanted to kind of, this is what we're doing here right now is spreading that love and spreading that joy. So thank you guys, and just want to say that. So it's my background right now. Became a #1 bestseller. last week on Amazon. So it was, and a lot of people are reading it, and through some other worlds, through my Tony world and stuff like that, and some senior leaders and stuff. And there, it's a really good book to kind of give people the education who'd have no education, so they can really take a look at how far we've used it and what it is for patients, and how we can actually really take it to the next level. Education is the key here, and that's what we're doing here right now, is educating, advocating for it.
And also, medical is really important because cannabis prohibition was put up by people who didn't give a fuck about cannabis. And when their relatives, their loved ones got sick and cannabis helped them, you better believe that it changed a lot of prohibitionists' minds.
Yeah, well, that's what we keep doing here. So I want to thank you all. And I see the chat's all thanking me too. So I just want to thank everybody here. And the next steps, right? 2025, what we can do, and with new technologies and with new voices and what we're doing here, and with AI and the legacy moving on. Smart AI and cannabis is coming out in about 3 months. So I'm gonna be really kind of pushing this towards how we can actually start moving forward with education for patients and for more access internationally, right? So we're really looking forward to this next little push here, guys.
I wonder how AI will play a role in the future of cannabis breeding, of discovering and understanding new genes and new components of the plant that maybe we're unable to, aggregate the data that we currently have in a way. Like it'll just be interesting to see how we can use AI. I mean, I saw you and Ryan got together recently, and you guys created like a virtual like Chimera.
hmm
That was pretty cool.
So, I
Oh,
mean, on the topic of AI, like I was just reading an article about Google's Gemini 2.0 diagnosing pancreatitis from a CT scan.
mhm.
That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about in terms of the future and how we utilize things. Specifically the work that you're doing, Mark Lewis. I mean, it's just another paintbrush in the tool chest.
Oh yeah, and
Um,
all of our collaborative agreements, I always put in there that they're not allowed to use our data sets for their AI models they build because
yeah, that's smart. Protect yourself,
gotta be
right?
ahead of
But
the game.
but utilize it for yourself and how to further your own research, is really what I'm getting at. And
And the
you know,
archive of data that we have, Ryan knows it's massive, and we could just you that way you could see inheritance patterns that I couldn't see previously, but the
yep.
AI can definitely see it. It's just it's a complicated thing. We need some massive injections of capital.
Yeah, I said it before, man. I'll say it again. We're massively underfunded for the concepts and ideas that I know a lot of you all here have. And to further those things, it's going to take dollars, right? And as I get older, it's only being ringing me truer and truer.
And
And you're
I'm
like,
going to
oh,
say something.
I want to solve here, solve this problem. Well, what's it cost to solve it?
I
This
got
might
brought
sound
into an AI project that was out of Germany that was
Mhm.
interesting, and it was the problem that they have with using AI in cannabis, which is why I got brought in, was they don't know what questions to ask.
So
And so
here's
the
what
bottom line with the AI is, what's the prompt
Right.
and what is it we're trying to actually do? And so I got brought in, but it was amazing because if I can remember what it was like if you're doing conventional breeding, you're able to say make 1,100 decisions. And if you're using marker assisted, you can go up to 100,000 decisions. But if you're working with AI, it sends you into the 100 million.
yeah.
So it was this exponential increase. And so I got together with the AI team out of Germany, and then a team of, they were pretty much like agronomic breeders of, corn, wheat, but brilliant guys. And so I got brought in to help take a look at the questions you would ask and where was the need. Like, what do we need in the world of cannabis? And not that I'm, omnipotent on the need of everyone, but I can say, hey, these are some of the places where we're definitely falling short. And what it came down to was using the AI allows you to see relationship patterns that we as humans otherwise couldn't see because we can't look at that much data simultaneously and see the pattern. And I think that once we start to be able to, and the issue with it is, in order for you to do this work, it's proprietary. So whoever holds the fucking AI key controls the data flow. So it isn't like we have the ability to kind of make a benefit that kind of spreads to many. It's some very specific. The company owns the data now. They own this path. And but I was just fascinated by the ability to begin to use some of these tools in this regard. And it gets kind of scary because when you start to apply, like everything I see now, I start to think is AI. Anybody who's a prolific poster, I'm like, that shit that you didn't write. It's, you can see this vanilla. And it's the, when I do writing, I throw it onto AI to see how AI would edit it because I don't like the edit. But it always lets me realize where there's me and then what AI removes from me. And I think that that's part of this process, is that we don't have this ability to get all the people in the same room at the same time with a common agenda. And, you know, fuck, we all want to get paid. But with cannabis and research and science and medicine, the financial part can't be the driving force, or otherwise you never get the product to actually hit the people that need it until the monetization component's there. Oh, you got a birthday today, man? Happy birthday on you, boy. Congratulations. That's awesome. You're muted, brother.
Oh yeah, you're muted, Colin.
You got me excited because what you're touching on is very much like the creative process where you iterate, and where you started is rarely where you end unless there's a real directive towards finishing that.
Yes.
Especially when it's open-ended. So to have more data points to be able to actually see that through iteration and process, that's the key right there to fully, cognitively expanding your own mind, right? And I think that's really what we're after. But to your point, the danger comes in when someone wants to take ownership of things, right? And then the monetary value, and then the ego starts to seep in, as Marcus said earlier, and that's where there's a balance, right? And that balance rarely lines up like harmonics. And that's the hardest part about this. But the tool is unbelievably powerful, and that's really hard to unsee. So thank you guys for an amazing time here. I'm gonna peace out, but you guys are all amazing. I love you all. Kev, Marcus, Mark,
What's up, Colin?
Good seeing you,
Wade,
brother. Happy birthday,
Skunkman Sam,
boy.
Chimera. Love you all. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Colin.
Yeah, happy birthday, brother.
Thanks,
May
bro.
it be a good one. Someone in the chat, Young Z, just just said, I had AI explain to me the Pia Teletech as Tupac doing a whole song.
Dude, have fun with it, right? That's sick.
Dude, it's all about the prompts. And I will say, Kev, it's gonna get scarier in the sense that you're right. Like, depending on how you give the prompt, AI will lose components of what you would sound like. But if you start training the AI to learn what you speak like and kind of guess what you're going to say next, when you give it prompts, you can say, in the way Kevin Jodfrey would write this, and then
But
you'll see that gets even scarier.
But you know what's trippy, Marcus, is that what happened was I had someone reached out to me to do a chapter for a scientific book, and it was what I covered was the history of cannabis in California. And when I ran it through the AI, just because I play with it, I don't use the tool, but I use the tool as a cleaner. It constantly removed the fact that we screwed the Mexicans over, that it wouldn't take away the fact that there was racism driving the phrase marijuana, and that in 1910, the newspapers said the Mexicans are going to steal your jobs.
Right.
And so no matter how I prompted AI, and I was like explicit, do not remove this portion, it couldn't not remove it.
Was that ChatGPT?
And yeah, and it was, and I
Yeah,
think I even have a paid. I might even have a paid version. But the point is that it's what AI you're using.
Correct.
And so that's where it gets confusing, because no matter how I changed the direction and was explicit in what I wanted, it wouldn't leave that in. And so I was cracking up, because I'm like, is AI revisionist? Is it a revisionist history machine?
Yeah, they're handcuffed. They're set around these guidelines that they have to follow, Right. And there's going to be more of them. I mean, the
Mhm.
government's going to be putting in regulations around all that stuff
They
too.
have guidelines set in there and they have different parts of ChatGTP. So they have 4.0, 3.5, then they have 1.0 turbo and stuff like that. So a lot of these ones now I'm seeing that I can't get into in block, but a lot of the GTPs or the agents I built a year ago are like back key doors they can go in. So it's understanding where you were on that time frame and how you can actually now use the ability. And that's what's talking about like a super intelligence, what's pretty cool about it is
Mhm.
where you were in that time frame, and there's different parts of ChatGTP. So you got 4 different large language models inside of that. Then you can use Claude, then you can use Perplexity, you can go to Gemini, you can go to Copilot. They're all based off a certain different, like the way they stack information. Like when you're a kid, as you grow up, you stack information. That's what's happened with these models. They've all stacking information. So if you have the ability to come back to your 5-year-old or your 10-year-old because you have that knowledge, then you can. So it's depending on where you come in on this platform and where you start adapting and learning. So what you're having problems with, Kevin, contact me. I can help you out totally with all kinds of cool shit. Totally. Good time.
And Kevin, I have a question for you. Who, which, you say you were doing California history. Who was who was you doing this for?
This was for Aniel, who's My Flora DNA. He's the individual that owns the My Flora DNA company. He was reached out to. I'm trying to think of the publisher, but it was a
Okay,
scientific
no,
publisher.
that answers my question. I was just curious if it was the professors at Humboldt University.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't through HSU. Um, I know Dominic really well too, but this was Aniel where he was brought in, and we wanted to cover some topics. And I said, "Oh, I'd love to cover California history," and mostly because a lot of it is that we took a smoking culture from Mexico, but then in the late 70s, we kind of adopt Asian genetics, but we don't take the culture of hash smoking until now. So to me, there was this huge irony of that we take the consumption and the genetics from Mexico that begins California's rise in the early 1900s. And it also begins the demonization with the word marijuana, with the fact that they associated the drug with Mexicans stealing your job. Then they expanded it to be where blacks will steal your women. And so this was this huge rhetoric. And I wanted to make sure that that shit was clearly stated because it's what shaped the very culture we're in. That
Well,
it's this constant nonstop theft.
I never felt that way
Strikingly on
since
point, though.
I never felt that way because my wife is Hispanic, her background, so I was doing it the other way around.
So it was just really it was interesting to me that when I used and I started playing around. I couldn't when I first did it truncated the chapter, and I just said, well, that's weird. Why would it remove all these key elements of a story? So I started playing with the prompts, and no matter how I prompted it, no matter what I said, no matter what I did, it wouldn't allow me to cover some of that dirty history. And I think that the mainstream people, so many of them don't understand the demonization process. And I think for a lot of Americans, they have a very hard time accepting it because you drank the American Kool. And I was in the military. I'm American. It's that I can accept what we did right and wrong. And with the drug war, that demonization was so complete, but it was so woven into racism. And California was this hotbed of it. And when you look at the 2024 headlines in the newspaper saying the Mexicans are stealing your jobs, and then you go back to a 1910 newspaper and it says in the headline, Mexicans are stealing your jobs, there was just this irony that I couldn't not cover. That the history of herb was stolen culture, stolen genetics, and no reciprocity in the process for so much and so many.
Hey, when I first popped on, Ryan was talking about IU Bloomington for some reason. And then we skipped to the waiting room question. I was just curious what you guys were talking about. because it is true. Those genetics did come out of there. That's where a lot of my seed and clone collection started in the 90s. So, and they came from Dave or McPartland back in that day, the 157 seed accessions. And there was this one cultivar that we got that, and I just want to use this time to ask, see if anyone remembers what it was. And it was almost brown with orange hairs, and it was super sedative, and they called it the Black African. And I still remember, dude, his name was Ross. He's a hippie dude, and like that was the first time I saw a food saver. Like they bring the kind bud out in the food saver, and we had the 35 millimeter film case. This was like 92. And I was wondering if Sam remembers what that cultivar was.
No, to be honest, but you got to remember, I left California in '85. So, was it around before '85?
No, it was a part of the seed collection that was sent to IU Bloomington to get chemotaxonomically
Oh,
Allegedly.
okay. Well,
Allegedly.
I did
via John
supply.
McPartland.
Okay. Well, uh, I
No, but John
supplied
McPartland
most.
that didn't have anything to do with those seeds.
You
He said
talking
that
about
he
Carl
helped.
Hillig, yes?
Yeah, Carl Hill. Yeah, Hill Malberg.
Okay. Yeah, because I supplied the majority of the genetics for Carl's studies. In the beginning, really a lot of them. And I got them either collecting them myself. A few of them I got from friends who had landrace genetics from, because we really wanted to test landrace genetics. Carl did, not polyhybrids, because the polyhybrids wouldn't answer the questions.
Yeah, what I was saying in that, Mark, was that those plants, like when Hillig did all that work, if you go back and you read the papers, they looked at all these different populations, but the ends were really low, right? Like they looked at like one or two plants from every accession. So it's not like they were doing population studies.
Right.
And I know you say that those plants came out of there, but I mean they really are. That's like allegedly came from there. There's just
Oh
no.
no, I'm 110%, dude. Like my old hookup's roommate worked in the greenhouses, and that's where like a lot of the clones in that area came from. 'Cause they were pulling them off those plants.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. We've had this conversation before. I mean, it was that was the other DEA lab, right? The other DEA grow along with UMISS, and like
Well,
it's
it
not like
wasn't
they were just
really a
letting everybody in and
DEA.
out of there with plants.
It wasn't really a DEA grow. It was just licensed by
That's what I
the
mean. It was a license. It was one of the two
yeah.
licensed facilities in the country.
But you got to remember that everybody said, what was it, G13 or G11? I forget. G13 came
Exactly.
from Mississippi University. Well,
Right.
that was my first question when I was there in Dr. O'Sully's office. I said, "So, did you ever grow a plant called G13?" And he said, "No." He looked through his records. He never grew a plant called G13. So,
That's the biggest myth there ever was, right? G13, because I've smoked the cannabis that comes from the University of Mississippi, and it came in around what, 4 to 5%. But I did talk to Suman this year when I was at the USDA, and he swears to me that he has a 22% cultivar in the ground right now. And I was like, I don't
well,
believe.
no. When I was there, uh, Dr. O'Sully showed me some work they were doing at the university, and it was 25, 30% THC. But it was not being grown in quantity to fulfill a contract. He was just experimenting. I also sent him some skunk number one seeds. So I know he grew skunk number one. And like you said, somebody mentioned that they inbred several generations for the work I think he was doing with George Weeble.
Yeah, I was talking with Suman. I was telling him on how I had tested his samples back in 2009 and how it failed molds and mildews. And he was like, really? Oh, hmm. That doesn't surprise me.
We had
Maybe
our
the
own
Bedrock can, Mark.
we had our
All
own
right.
mythical story up here in Canada, and it was the chemo, the UBC chemo. We had I'd heard it called wheelchair weed. I'd heard it called the chemo, and it was like it was in the early 90s that a friend of mine, his story was that his auntie was getting it. She was part of this study and she had cancer and she was getting it. And it was like, it was always very wet, like it just hadn't been dried properly. Like someone was like almost stealing this weed. And it was just like very dark and red. And
Was
I,
was was that the story where David
It's
Suzuki
yes.
supposedly bred it?
Yes, and I went to UBC and I worked in the botany department and I asked everybody at the department if they ever grew weed there and they absolutely did not. So it's
Well,
another
I
one of those
I asked
stories.
David Suzuki if he ever had that variety, and he told me no.
Well, and I just
David
posted something in the
Suzuki.
chat, but maybe Marcus can pull it up and put it on the screen. I was actually
Sure.
driving into work at NAPRO one day and I ended up behind a subcompact car and it had G13 on the license plate. And I went and looked it up. G13 is the government code for a subcompact car. So, like, and it has G13 right on the license plate. It's the first part of the code on the license plate. Mark can pull it up. There's actually pictures on the internet if you search it. Um,
But
but
my
yeah, there it
favorite
is right
license
there.
plate is the one that Todd McCormick has, THC Maven, a California license plate for his car.
You'll
THC
see it
Maven.
if you drive around California, or I'm sure it's other parts of the countries, and you see government plates on there's specific government plates for government vehicles, and all the subcompacts are the first part of the code is G13. So
Hmm.
this is again some stoner myth that's been bastardized and turned into stoner lore.
It's just neat that there's so much stoner lore, you know? You got to think that there's a lot of it too, with so
Well,
many different
we called it
cultivars.
smoking circle lore, right? Because it's what we would share in our smoking circles as we would go out back in the 90s and, when we were doing the early activism for what we were doing. Yeah, that's what people were doing. They were
Well,
congregating
I can,
sociologically in their circles and then going to their other circles and spreading that information, misinformation accordingly, amoeba-like.
and I
Yeah,
can
exactly.
remember when
Playing the
I was
telephone
reading
game.
about my company, Sacred Seeds, which I started in the mid 70s, the world's first cannabis seed company. And it was a whole story about how it had started in the late, in the after the Second World War in the 1940s. And it was a group of cannabis growers who started this company. And uh, you know, it was a West Coast seed collective, and none of this was true. I started it. It was my company. I named it, and it wasn't until the mid '70s. But yeah, I mean, the story was entertaining because people didn't know the truth, so they just made shit up.
Well,
Dude,
people love stories.
man, did
Look
they
at
ever.
Lowell. Look at Lowell out of California, right? Lowell was just folded up under the state house implosion, but Lowell, there with originally they came out with this identifier that it was connected to this man named Bull Lowell, and Bull Lowell was some renegade hemp farmer who fought the government in the 20s, and he had been involved all these years, and that whole shit was manufactured, right? And so it was incredible because it becomes this people start literally, worshiping Bull Lowell as this character, and it's almost like saying Paul Bunyan was real. And so we're creating myths and then making them real, and
Paul
then people are
Bunyan
taking
wasn't
this shit
real.
to heart like it really existed.
What?
Well,
The
listen,
blue
I
eyes
don't I don't
wasn't
want to
real
create
either? What?
I don't
You
want
know
to
what I'm
create the
saying?
impression.
It was a great story though. They stole the shit out of it, and then the problem was, they go through all the other issues, but at the end of that operation, some friends of mine were running the gardens and were just doing some incredible work. So the quality of what they produced turned around dramatically, and
Yeah,
the
but their damage was done with their
early.
cafe, right? Their cafe
Well,
where
they had the herpes outbreak,
cafe.
which is kind of a problem,
Yeah, but that didn't mess them up financially as much as the fact that it was
It
the same with
ruins the
all these.
reputation, though.
That was where the Bull Lowell story imploded.
Well, that's where people did further digging and found out it was
Yes, and found that none of that was real.
Like,
It was all
this
about
is all bull.
They had a smoke lounge, and they didn't clean the pipes effectively, and someone came in with oral herpes and contaminated the pipes, and then an entire battery of people that came in after contracted herpes, mouth herpes, from that situation, because that was the only common factor that all these people had. And so
let's remind people, cleaning pipes is a very important thing. And when we used to have an on-site dispensary where people could use, one of the main things you always had to do was alcohol and majorly clean your pipes. So it's okay if you're going to use, but do not forget, cleanliness is fucking important so you don't get problems like this. Because imagine you were just going to a cannabis cafe and you come out with a smack of herpes. Yeah, that was bad. It wasn't just one, you know.
Oh no, it was many. It was many. It was only on one instance though. It was they made a mistake that was.
It only takes one.
Yeah, but it brought the story to light, and I was cracking up because it just we live in there's the truth, and then there's the truth that we all see. And so when you tell the story of the truth that you saw, not necessarily the fucking truth.
Right.
Right. And that's cannabis to me. Cannabis is.
Are you telling me that Josh D didn't invent OG Kush?
Listen, I just want to say too,
I'm telling you, if you want to find the truth, don't pick up your truth on the internet.
No, you create your own truth. And unless I was in the room with you, I just try to always put some benefit of the doubt so that way I don't get so much into dogma. And the problem is that we don't even know we have dogma because we're shit. If you're American, you're American. And when you leave the country and then you have people from other countries speak to you about how they perceive Americans, you're in hysterics because we're like a fucking cartoon character. So to me, you always have to leave some doubt of any story. But what I know in cannabis is because it had to live in the shadows, the sexier the story, the more the polish that went on it, the further we got away from anything fucking authentic. And it hurts people's feelings when you kind of deconstruct the myths. The story's better. The myth's not fucking needed. That's the thing is herb is so unbelievably sophisticated. It doesn't need a supporting cast. It doesn't need any hype.
Yeah, but you've seen it a million times. It's like there's so many people in this industry that want to put themselves in the center of the story, right? They want to be the main character.
It's validation, and they don't understand. It's like people that are panicking about the IG shit being dropped, right? And I'm like, well, if your whole fucking existence is on IG, that makes me wonder what you do other than be on IG.
Yeah.
Right. So social media is incredible, but if you're so fucked up about your account being slowed down, what is it that's so unbelievably important about that account? And is it because you're making money on it? Is it validation?
It's their identity.
It's also heroin, man. That's just heroin. Take your iPad away from your kid and watch what happens, dude.
I will say this. For a 40-year-old, though, I'm telling you, 40-year-old male right now is some of the oddest shit I ever see online is when I can kind of see your age by little nuances in communication, but it's they've learned to use this play. So kids today, like when I talk to my kids, none of them communicate that way online. They're like, oh, that shit's taboo. They go, that's the generation below you, Dad. That's their form of communication online. We grew up with the tool, so we treat it like we're in person. You guys treat it like you're on a fucking island and somebody can't reach you at some point in person about what you're saying. And it just creates this rage. And so what I see when I'm seeing discourse online, it's whoever has the loudest voice and can type the quickest seems to be correct. And it removes any kind of like real discussion where you should be. if I say something like I did the other day, sometimes I talk in absolutes. I'm like, nobody does that. What I really mean is like 98% of people don't do it.
Yeah.
And so someone comes out with an outlier and they're like, look, here's an outlier, you're wrong. And I'm like, well, no shit. But if you can only find one fucking instance of what disqualifies this massive population, right? The preponderance of evidence says I would bet on that. I look at it like in a statistical point of view, that once we get to a certain point, it is the majority. It just is. And so, but if you can come up with the outlier, I'm like, awesome, you're right. We don't have to fight over like anyone is the smartest person in the room, because at the end of the day, we're only smart in our lane. So and so you got to be able to have some space to be able to communicate, but it can't be ad hominem, which is like what happens with you. Is I noticed that you trigger people because you tell them something that absolutely fucking shocks their value system, because their information was based off of what they imagined. And you say, hey, this is actually how it works. And because you're telling them something that isn't refutable, it's just fact. It fucks them up emotionally. And what they do is they come at you emotionally in an ad hominem attack, because you've hurt them so deeply, because you've challenged their very fucking essence of their grower shit.
Yeah.
And it's crazy.
Chimera delusion syndrome or whatever it is.
He's throwing leather through the screen, but it's the only way we're going to learn. And so I don't mind admitting I'm wrong if I can get upgraded information. Half the shit we know wrong. It's only through the course of your life that you're really able to correct all this stuff. I mean, fuck, where if you're looking at anything scientific, every theory's been refuted to a degree, even fucking physics, because quantum physics doesn't operate the same. So every time we get deeper and deeper into the wormhole, we start to understand how little we understand. But the problem with the communication online is that so many people are not leathered, meaning that their skin isn't thick. So if you tell me to fuck off on the internet, I don't go home and hang myself. I don't really care. I go have a cup of coffee and I go smoke a joint and I go fucking spend time with my kids. But for so many people, they're more tender. And that's not a negative. It's just the human population is softened in some regards in terms of exterior.
Words are violent to them.
Yep,
Yeah,
and,
well,
and
like
they
this-
are. That's the way. That's a brilliant way to say it. Words are violent, and so for me, I try never to be, disrespectful to someone on it, because really, what I want to do is I want to have people that otherwise wouldn't enter our space. And I'm from a very different background, but I know that the people that we want to have come into cannabis is the diverse, most biggest pool. Just like when we're working with gene pool in breeding. You want the most to begin with so that you can really have what you want to chase. And I think that that's the issue with the online situation and information and cannabis, is that people have developed such strong opinions based off of whatever that they got it from, that when you shock them, they have a nervous breakdown. And the 40 or early 40, I'm 60, early 40-year-old male right now is emotionally fucking traumatized. It's crazy.
It's
Hey,
funny.
guys, I'm gonna hop
I've been
off here. I'm
involved.
saying bye. Peace, y'all. See you
Later,
next time.
Mark.
Thanks for
You
know,
coming up,
I've-
Dr. Mark.
I've been in enough of these situations online. Just I haven't been involved with this for so long now. It's like the Sam, David Watson, his DEA stuff, right? That's going on. For years, people swore up and down that it was reality. And, folks like Marcus and myself, we knew David, we knew Sam. And, when you start chasing down the truth, there's little kernels of truth that get bastardized into some big crazy rumor, right? Like, for example, David, your Sam used to export, or has exported seeds to the University of Mississippi from Holland, and that was done with a DEA license that was granted to University of Mississippi, right? Um, and that little kernel of truth gets snowballed into this big story that somehow Sam is working for the DEA, which is complete nonsense, right? But it's like I've seen it so many times now throughout the last 20 years that it's like the story that is the common story that's told in public versus the real story that you know to be factual and true that isn't told in public, or it doesn't, it's like that old expression. It's like, by the time the truth wakes up in the morning, the lie has already run around the world, right? Or whatever that expression is, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so these like fantastical, insane stories get blown up into reality, like the Philos thing, right? When the Philos thing came around, I had people like making death threats to me because they thought that I was working. It was me, and I remember Matt Riot going around saying me and David and Rob Clark were like, the most evil people in cannabis, and we'd sold out the germplasm to Philos, which was
Well,
just
well, Philos invented a gene cannon that you could use to spray code on, so you could resurrect any dead material.
right.
And I was being told that they invented this gene gun to resurrect any material ever discovered. And I said, let me get this straight. You invent a gun that can resurrect any fucking code ever created, and your fucking green crack cut is what they chose to fucking do.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Well,
I
yeah.
mean, the whole it goes nuts, but I understand why it happened. It to me, it was like this. There was a twofold component where you're having a societal collapse in cannabis, and we're being nullified. And for the first time, people in cannabis found out they didn't have any fucking real money. So everyone
Right.
was making money in cannabis. We're all making money. We're making lawyer money. We're making doctor money. Well, when you got into legal cannabis, you got to learn what fucking VC money was.
Right.
And it instantly humbled everyone that was in commercial cannabis. So people who were doing, small indoors, doing small stuff, small outdoor, they didn't experience it the same way because their intent was more, I would say, pure to produce a little bit of sale, herb to smoke. But when you're doing like commercial size work, you have this idea of where you are in this ecosystem. And then when cannabis became legal for the first time in US, you got to see giant fucking entities pour in and pour dollars down. And I think at first is what it did is it broke everybody down emotionally. And the only thing that cannabis people had left was the two things. We got the genes and we got the culture. And so they clung to these things as if that was what was going to sell the pot for them.
Right.
And every time somebody went at any of it, it got worse and worse for them emotionally. Now there's so fucking few people left in cannabis that used to exist in cannabis that it's not really, it's a very different situation. People have become very accepting of the fact that they're getting their ass whipped, that they're not special, and that you got to convince people to smoke your weed because you're in a price war. But at that moment, there was still decent money for weed. There was still the memory of the freedom. And when these companies came in and started to say, you guys can't breed, people lost their fucking minds because they didn't understand what that meant. It didn't mean that you couldn't create things that have been economically viable for time, but you can't create products that are uniform, that can be grown by fucking seed for simplicity and cost effectiveness. And no one looked at cost effectiveness at that time. Like, people weren't running books at all. You were making so much fucking margin on the work that there was no accounting.
Well, and they were living like rock stars. I mean, I remember going
Ooh,
up
fuck, it was
High Rock,
great.
and it was like, people running like 3, 4 properties at a time. Each property's pulling down 99 trees at like 5 pounds at least.
Oh yeah, no,
They're
3,000 pound
they're doing
grows.
$1 million a year cash,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like tripping all over the world and spending money like it's going out of style, like they're fucking rock stars. And nobody put any money aside, nobody invested, nobody protected their futures, and they just assumed that next year was going to be the same, and next year after that was going to be the same, and the gravy train would never stop,
It
right?
lasted so long. That was the thing, is that herb run was forever. So you created children who only knew cannabis opulence, right? So like
Right.
I come from I'm born in the 60s. I raised in the 70s. I got to watch the rise of cannabis. But when I got out to the West Coast, and so I realized, like, wow, you guys were born into this reality. And it emotionally just smashed people. And I don't think anybody's ever, until you pitch for money, you don't realize how many fucking lies you got to tell to get it. So like, you have to have a really good deck but you have to be able to make that shit look like it's the Mona Lisa, or it just gets ignored. And money pitches, I always say it's the same thing. If you were young and you were at the bar or a club and you were trying to get a date, if someone recorded you and no one knew what you were saying, like you didn't know that you were being recorded, what would you be telling the person you were trying to go on a date with? You would be trying to let them know how fucking phenomenal you were so that you would be able to make this happen. And I'm like, if you could ever listen to that conversation to an audience, it would horrify you, because it's an over exaggeration, because it's a desire.
Well, and that's what happened to the Pubcos too, right?
Whoa,
I mean,
yeah.
that's why they all blew apart, is because they told these fantastical stories that had like next to no basis in fact.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it came time to putting the rubber on the road, like they couldn't live up to the story that they had told.
No,
And
but they were
frankly,
great
like
storytellers. I mean, they raised how many? Some of these companies pulled in billions.
I know. And I had
Mind-bending
like,
billions.
listen, in those years, I was trying to pitch reality to VCs, and they weren't interested.
No,
because
no.
the story wasn't fantastical enough, and it was like the truth and the fact that you're trying to give them an honest story that wasn't good enough for them. These people want to be bamboozled by the diamonds, right?
They need the allure of huge returns quick.
Yeah.
And honest, and that's the problem, is that if you go to do it now, to go put on your cannabis leaf suit. So they walk in there, they really know the topic. So I mean, there's you know what I'm saying? The whole fucking persona is crazy. But it was that we got to see the era. I mean, I remember when I first got to Humboldt, the game in Humboldt County at that time was to look as poor as possible publicly.
Right.
And so I meet all these people at a club one night, and I thought it was like a fucking homeless convention. And the next day, I'm up the hill doing a deal, and I'm at this guy's mansion in the fucking forest, and we're both dying. And I said, he goes, dude, it's like our joke, but we have this incredible secrecy in our lives. And when we go to town, we always have shitty hill rigs, and we always look broke. And we have our real life we hide, and then we leave the country and go do what we do. I remember when that secrecy changed and everyone started wearing gold chains with big trucks, because now you could display the money. And so culturally, if you've been in it long enough, you get to see these evolutions of how people behave and what they do. And in some regards, because the loss of money and the ease of access, like I notice in the farming community, it's people who really fundamentally love to farm organic pot. That if you're still here, it's because you have a very different desire, and you've accepted that it's a struggle, and you've accepted that it's low margin, and you've accepted that you're going to have to do other work outside of your farm so that you can maintain, because really it's a long game in terms of protecting, heritage assets. So, all these transitions have been brutal, and any company that came through and created any ripple, or any individual, holy fuck, man, it was like an online bloodbath. And now basically a lot of it just dies down because herb isn't so secret. You don't have to live online.
Right.
You go fucking buy it anywhere now.
When people offer you something that sounds too good to be true, it is.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. If it's, I always want to know the downside. There's no such. I just need to know the downside, and if someone can't describe it, I just know it's a pitch. It's. You have to be able to calculate risk, and risk calculation is the key in the old game too. It wasn't like we were all lunatics. It was that we were lunatics that could calculate risk, and we were like, all right, this is ballsy, but the odds weigh in my favor. And I just think that you have to still see that. And I think that when legalization came in, for so many people, they believed that legalization was going to create contracts and relationships that were more actually stable than illegal. And the truth was that wasn't true at all. That
100%.
People learned that just because you have ownership in a company or you're part of something doesn't mean shit, because the people driving it have no intention to build a company. Their intention was to raise the money, siphon the salaries, take the perks, and then move the fuck on.
Yeah. Well,
And once I saw that, I was like, whoa.
Well, it was so different than the way that we used to work because I mean, it used to be your word was your bond. And if you gave up your word, you were out,
You had
right?
no
Like
value.
you
You
couldn't
couldn't get it. Yeah, you couldn't get in the flow.
exactly. So it was, although it was illegal, it was based on honor and integrity. And if you didn't have honor and integrity, you were out.
I,
So,
I,
yeah.
I have a question, which is, could you name a couple of the varieties that you bred, uh, Kevin?
Totally. A lot of the stuff that I do, Sam, is like replication work to hold stock and then to create populations of stock that I would be able to put through the process before. So the stuff that I'm involved with is really projects where I put pieces into it. So I provide plants and clones that I think have agronomic value, commercial value, and I put them in the hands of other breeders. And so for me, I'm not really a breeder, Sam. What I do is I understand the market's desire for product. I think my skill is in interpretation. And so what I do is I locate plants of interest that I in dealings, and I realize that this plant would be useful in a project, and I place it with people. So there's a full network of individuals that do breeding companies all over that part of their project came from me, but not in a financial way. What I want is I want to be able to develop relation. And this has been a strategy my whole career, Sam, that I was somebody who always could access genes. And what I wanted was I wanted to spread the genes out around me so that there was constantly new material coming through my hands. What I did was I built operations, and when I built your operation, I would do the development of the operation off of plants that I was doing R&D on. And so when I was able to create an operation, I could then subsequently become your clone provider to feed you the material that you use. So what I was looking for was clonal selections that had extreme velocity in sales, that made the grow process simple, because the idea of removing people from the grow at the time was critical, so you had less security issues. So that's how this has been like, that would be 90s, right? So in the 90s, that's what I was doing. And I never really wanted to get heavily into breeding because the work required to really do it. My mother was a research geneticist, so I grew up in a house with fucking fruit fly experiments. And I realized that that's not where I wanted to be. What I wanted to be was to work with breeders, but my skill was an interpretation of what a quality plant was and what the market likes. And so
Well, yeah,
if
you
I could,
also the one thing that blew me away when I met you was your ability to understand the plants in all these different environments. Like there's nobody else that I ever came across that understood all these different cultivars and how they would perform in different environments, like along the coast or in the hills, and what that would generate on the market. Like you were like a fucking encyclopedia in that way. And
and that's what I dig, Ryan, is I like, in my mind, I'm a field scientist because I love to see the activity and the action. And for me, being able to locate incredible plants out of populations and then interject them into other people's breeding operations so that they can go do the work and the development, it allows me to be able to, I guess my goal originally was I wanted to see a lot of good herb in the system. And because, like, for me, herb kind of gave me a life I wouldn't have had. As I was developing, I was somebody that was kind of an anomaly in that world because I shared the genes with people that weren't considered like special. So if you and I were friends and you had to grow, I would let you access material that you couldn't have got your hands on any other way. But I didn't have any restrictions to you in terms of you owe me anything. I'm like, look, this plant could probably change your life. And for a lot of people, when you give them the right clone, it bought them a house. If you give them the right clone, it helped them pay for their kids to go to college. And so what I didn't understand was that when I was planting those fields of sharing material that was very hard for average people to get their hands on, I didn't really realize that they would get older with me and their kids would get older. And what occurred was I was really cultivating a population of people that I had helped when they were considered not valuable, and they grew up to be valuable. And so it wasn't an intent. It's just, it's weird, but like it gave me a reach into cannabis that's unusual, because when you help people when they aren't considered valuable and they end up having a very good life and become valuable, they always remember your ass for being cool when you didn't need to be. And so I'll get emails and phone calls from people that are like, yo, like, I don't know if you even remember me, but you helped me tremendously 15 years ago when I needed some help. And I've waited all these years because I have this incredible life and I want to reach out to you and say thank you. And it was all through plant sharing. So that plant sharing allowed me to have this really beautiful life in terms of like feeling like you were doing something positive in the world of cannabis that wasn't financial, but I didn't expect it to create such an incredible network of access. I didn't realize that I was creating this web of access to things all over the globe. And because of it, it lets you touch stuff that people around you don't get to touch. And by being able to utilize 50 breeders, be able to work on 50 different projects around the world, and you know, it lets me work with people that are far smarter than I am, which is phenomenal.
You know, it's so not that unlike what Sam did with the International Hemp Association and Hortifarm, and what Bubble Man has done with Hash Church, right? Like you become the center spoke for this hub of a wheel, and you're giving people the tools to build their futures. Yeah, it's pretty amazing, dude.
And not just giving the tools, Ryan, because it's, you know, Kevin getting genetics to people like key clones, that's incredible. But the real incredible part, and the reason why it grew into what it grew into, is because he didn't put limitations on them.
No, it's the
The
information,
rules, right? Oh,
right?
I'll give you this clone, but you can't share it with anyone. Don't give it out. Don't do anything. You know, it's just like, no, just give it out. Let it go out. Let people do what they're going to do with it, and you will create something much more valuable than you would have had you gone into it with a fear and scarcity sort of perspective.
Yeah. Well, and it comes. It wasn't. I was didn't mean the tools and just as the genes, but it's like, you know, Kevin is someone that approaches this with such passion and love. It's like it's not about the clones. It's about the clones and the context and the information, right? It's like he really was setting people up to win, and that's so rare in this industry. You know, I've had a few people that I've met, I've ended up meeting later through the industry, and they've come back to me and been like, this is just like you said, like Kevin, it's like, it's like you allowed me to pay for like 3 houses and put my kids through college, right? Like my ex-wife's house, and my kids and their university degrees and all that stuff. It's like, just because you shared some things with them. So it's hella gratifying.
And I like the preservation end, Sam. And preservation, I understand it's limited in terms of like population size, but it's more of preservation of understanding that material that we play with from other locations, if we can get it into the hands of people, what we start to do is bring awareness. And I think that that's what the small cultivators really have to understand, is that your small cultivator community is your immediate community around you in your town, and then in your state, then in your country, but it's around the world. And I think that when you travel and you work in enough locations, which I've been really fortunate to do, that small culture, that small cultivator, they're still the same. It's a passionate endeavor. The money's needed, but the desire and the historical relevance is the connection. And I think that we got so caught up in our myopic views of who's created products and where they came from, that if you can get material from Laos into the market and get people to understand that they like these products and this is why and what population enjoys it, it starts to bring value to the people in Laos. I think that cannabis, because it's global and because you have access now for the first time in ways we've never had prior, there has to be this globalization mentality for the cultivators to understand that you're not siloed, that you have an ability to create relationships and create derived benefit And I think that's just it's phenomenal. It's just trying to get it into play. But for many people, they've never had. I mean, fuck, we didn't have this access. If you started growing right now in 2024, you have as enough information to create anything you want online for free. You could go on YouTube and literally go to enough lectures to where you had an understanding that none of us ever had. It's amazing. It's amazing. Like I always just trip out on it. So what I know is that like I'm siloed in my past and how we operated. And it's going to be the people that come in next that'll take it to the level. They'll build on Sam's work. Because all of us that like scientific stuff, that's where all the base information came from. I researched all of you guys. So all this time we're all working on our own fields. I know to look at people who are better than I am at what they do so that I'm able to get the understanding and not have to go spend. It's kind of like the whole concept of this lecture was difference between seed and clone. And the thing you have with seed and clone is seed is fucking easy to store and to germinate. As a farmer, if you could just receive your genetics in a package or break them out of a vault in a package and then crack them and you got uniformity enough to sell it as a lot, because when we're talking pounds now, it's 50-pound minimum on a test, right? So 50 pounds is a batch. So if I can get 50 homogeneous pounds from seed, that means I don't have to schedule anything with the nursery. I don't have to do my own in-house nursery. That means I don't have to worry about, and even with like TC, right? So say you get a load of TC plants and they've hormonally fucking charged them a little heavy to where they don't want to extend or they don't want to go into a vegetative state. You can fuck up the hormone level in the agar and the plant doesn't want to flower. So like I've seen enough problems in propagation to know that the only thing that makes me have total control of it with the least amount of stress is seed. Like if I could run my whole farm from seed and be able to effectively move it, it would completely change the labor of your operation.
Oh, sorry about that. I guess I was muted there for a second. Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it for sure. I guess it's why they've been working on all of these different ways. Since I mean, the seed is the God-given, right? The seed is from the creator. It's the ultimate packaging to plant from. But you've always got, scientists and agronomists and people that are focused on also figuring out ways to make that a little bit easier if it's possible. I'm not sure. It's certainly not my area of expertise. I love the fact that there are people focused on breeding because it makes it easy for me. My interest is to find people who pay enough attention to this that they understand what good genetics are and they understand how to get good genetics to express themselves. And that's when I come in to into the hash making process. But I sure appreciate what a lot of you on the panel do in regards to the work that requires to be done to make stronger cannabis, to make tastier cannabis, and to, I guess, Kevin, in a sense, it's great what you're doing too, is that you're offering access for companies into these flavor profiles, and you have that deeper understanding of those flavor profiles and what's popular and what's trending to be able to get them into that so quickly without them having to take years and years and years to gain access to those by that time the flavor profile trends have switched and changed. It's pretty fucking cool, man.
It what a lot of the thing is that you have to make it clear that there's really two like cannabis industries. There's the industry where you're licensed and you're forced to operate under those constraints, and the one where you're not. And they're not interchangeable. The one that's licensed, margin is fucking critical because your margins are so minimal. And so you have to be able to work on that reality. And so that's a separate, to me, breeding category, selection category. And then the home grower and those that are working in the illicit, and they're moving it in and they're filling the void that legal cannabis does not provide. So they're two different groups, and they both require specificity, but they're both fucking fascinating to work in. I mean, that's really the truth of it, is that being able to see uniformity, consistency, unbelievable, and then being able to go into clonal selection for the outliers that we haven't been able to put into line form. It just creates a situation where like you're never bored. So like just like with you and Hash, like your evolution. I got to hang out with the Brazilian dude yesterday at the High Church. He's a cat from him and his partner came from Brazil, and they live in the Emerald Triangle. And he's a killer hash maker, but he brought me a bunch of static tech, and it was killer. Oh yeah, and he broke it out. But and I said, oh, we got to get you on a show sometime, because it would be fascinating to listen to someone who was born and raised in Brazil, and about the culture of cannabis in Brazil, the whole how it's approached, the restrictions, illegalities, struggles, access. But just fascinating, and his direction is things that work well for him in that technology. And so being able to be part of the world right now, the tools are really, really, really fucking extensive, but you can go totally opposite of the science tech end of it and just go into pure expression of enjoyment for the customer. And that's fascinating too, because it's not COA driven. So like it's almost like the COA is this separating line between how you're approaching it, where if the COA matters, then there's an entire process to go that route. And if it doesn't, it doesn't.
Well, the COA is the thief of authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And, the plant wants to be authentic. When you hit that authenticity note, people connect and relate and really create a connection to that particular cultivar. And I think some of the people in the commercial environment don't really understand. That's something that's missing, the same way you could see the AI missing parts of you when you ask it questions. They're missing that part of cannabis in a big way, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's been nice. A lot of the hemp laws have made shit cool too. So like we got the Grateful Head going over in the East Coast, and we call it a global cannabis repository. And it's just that what we were able to do is amass some really good collections from the members of the group that are vetted collections, where you have some trail of where the clone came from, why it was special. You have some records of it. It's something that you've connected and held, and we were able to compile a cluster of it and then run it through meristematic cleansing, so that what we have is a true Gen Zero. And the idea is to be able to create an access bank, so that if you wanted to do a project, you could reach out and purchase a plant, but have it come to you clean. And so the ability to get, third-party verification, the ability to get the plants in that initial form, for a lot of people that they just don't get the access. And so the tools, I think, are what needed, because like I said, that to me, hobby breeders, I'm a hobby breeder. So I see it as where you get to passionately chase your direction. And then you have individuals that are doing scientific breeding, where it's an extremely limited range of what they're trying to achieve. It's very narrowed. And the access to the initial source plant material is the same. You have to start somewhere. And I think that what you see in a lot of operations is that people begin their process with what I would say poor source material. So when you come into larger operations, I always ask who selected the library. Like, you're selling this product. You have $100 million facility. These are the products you are producing. Who chose them? And why did you choose them? And so I think that the idea of what is good source material and what you should produce, and where does your end product land?
I have a question for you, which is, what percentage of plants that you see out there, especially clones, are intersex?
Oh, I see a lot. Dave. And what I noticed is it's really because of the fact that, and this is like an opinion, but from doing reversals, What I know is that plants that reverse the easiest also are most plastic in terms of that expression. And I think that when you're doing all this reversal work, you're so intent on creating the product that you're not understanding that you're creating products that have intersex susceptibility or propensity. And so for me, even with anything that I do, it's something that I just have to cull. And so even if plants have, some subtle expression of it, I got to pull them out of the process. And even with the males, you have to take the male all the way out to past fruition to see if the males it goes intersex. And I just think that, we have an ability with scientific equipment to measure, but not for the home breeder. And I think that with the rise of STS breeding, which I think is fascinating because it lets everybody create seed, I think that what you've done is you've made poor parental selection and you've increased that rate. And I think that I don't see it as much under outdoor lighting, where like if I'm doing stress testing, what I really want to do is put it under some steered LED. Something about that narrow band spectrum that LED provides seems to really bring out intersex characteristics quickly. So
yeah, well, photo period stressing varieties will absolutely cause a lot of expression of intersex, but I've seen it from a million other environmental, from growing it in a little tiny pot for too long, cold, heat, too much nutrient, too little nutrient.
Yep.
I mean,
Any stress.
And besides that, there's also varieties that they don't need any stress at all. They're genetically linked to intersex from the get-go.
Yes,
And
yes, yes. They have that propensity, which I
and
kind of notice in populations of like Southeast Asia.
I've eliminated so many of varieties because of that linkage to intersex, and it's hard to find plants that don't have it genetically, and even more so under environmental stress. But I guarantee you can find them. They are out there, and if you do enough stress testing for years on a single clone, you'll be able to tell. And it, when you use those individuals, I've never seen intersex progeny coming up from my STS usage, and we started using it. I don't know, about 1990. So,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
no, I don't think the STS is the issue, Sam. I think it's the fact that when you are using STS, the plants that initiate, it's kind of like when you're doing reversals on plants in terms of like a revegetation. The more equatorial the plant is, the more the subtle light influence makes the transition. So if I take a Colombian all the way into flower and dig it up and bring it in and put it under light so I can recover that plant, its transition back to vegetative is far more elegant than that of a determinant, say, 35-degree Pakistani.
yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I've had plants which, once they really started to flower, you could not re-veg it, no matter what you did.
Yeah, frustrating. And so I think it's similar to that in that regard. And I think that it's just that when you're doing all this work and you're trying to succeed, you'll make concessions for that. But if you're really breeding, you don't. That's the difference, is you're being highly discerning. For me, it's in selection, which if the shit doesn't work, it doesn't work. I don't care what
Right.
emotional connection I have to
I used to have a saying, I just love to kill. And
it.
that's exactly like you say. I mean, it's kind of like what Luther Burbank did. He used huge populations and got rid of everything that didn't fit his agenda.
No, that's exactly who, when I started to really take a look at population genetics and breeding selection, it was Burbank, because in California, there was all these things named after Luther Burbank, and I didn't realize who he was until I saw the connection. And it was his level of discernment, which was select only the finest and cull all rest. And I started to take a look at other breeding processes or in terms of crops and animals, so I could start to see some of the commonalities. And at the end of the day, the successful projects always really where they had done the work on the parental lines in terms of what came from it, and they had maintained them so they could continue moving that line forward. Where most people, they don't check the progeny. So the problem with STS work is you self something, but you're not necessarily testing out all the work that you're doing. So much of the seed stock that I see available is unproven. So you have a something and a something, and you put it together and you sell it. But what you have really is an untested line. And what we've done is we've moved all this untested material into the system. And because people get a hold of it and they have a desire and it does well, it's just that you don't really understand that when you breed that plant, it is going to bring a poor direction. The outcome isn't always what's expected. I always say I'm a good breeder male because my kids look like their mom. So I only passed a couple traits across. I passed blue eyes and I passed some eye shape. But other than that, my children look identical to their mothers. So I say I'm a really good breeder male. I bring some very known traits and I let all the good traits of the female pass through. And if you look at me, though, I'm just average guy, but I got some really above average kids. And I laugh and I'm like, it's because my influence is low and it allows this to occur. But you wouldn't know that until you saw the progeny. And I think that that's really what takes place with these expedited breeding projects, is that the plants that reverse easily are the ones you choose. You don't understand that comes with a potential. So the easier a plant does something, that means the easier it does something else. And I just think that the ability for people to be able to play with the tools and have public forums to be able to get the education is phenomenal, because you will see individuals creating some stunning stuff. But right now, you got to run everything in multiple locations, even under crop steering. Crop steering, if you're pushing the EC on the plants and you're driving that PPFD high, that'll trigger a whole series of issues. And so you kind of have to really steer for, this plant was developed for this location, this operation, and this methodology. So like at the R&D facility, we do indoor, outdoor, and mixed light. The indoor test op gives us 84 different zones. So there's 84 zones we can play with on computer, so that we can really kind of figure out what works best for what, so that when we put the map together for the cultivar to go to the operation to produce the product, they have the data set that they can plug in, and they'll basically use the same Arroyo sensors, same database. That'll allow them to be able to replicate what the R&D facility did to get that result.
I always found it amazing that the seed companies were not trialing their progeny before they sold them.
All the time. But that's the problem.
I know,
yeah.
But I never did.
Well, it's why I never really, like, I'm about to release some seed stock, and I'm releasing it because it's I would say it's probably some of the best work I've done in sense where I got a hold of some work that I got to smoke an outlier, which I was upset about because it sent me down this rabbit hole. But I really enjoyed this profile and it was unique. And so I bought a bunch of seeds from the breeder, and I was hoping to find that profile as a clone. And I just wanted to smoke it and have it at the house. But it wasn't in that initial cluster. And so I opened up the population and I found it, and it was only at like 1 in 100 on a frequency. And I wanted to be able to not have to hold the clone if I could increase the frequency, so that I could just keep the seed, so that when I wanted to go run through, I could. And as I get older, I don't want to hold plants the same way I did when I was young. So like the amount of work you want to do around your personal use changes. And so I went into the line, and I was able to get the frequency up to around 40 out of 100. And that was reasonable to me, where you have a 4 out of 10 chance to get that profile that used to be 1 in 100. And so it was beautiful. And then the people that got to consume it, smoke it, really liked it. And it just gives people we're into the F3. This F4 will come out next. but it lets me get a profile into the public that you can't get your hands on because the original work is done. There hasn't been any re-releases. And I didn't want to knock off my partner's work. But if you take a line a couple years down into sorting, what you have is you have a worked line that I think is pretty good. And I want to release it into the public so that the people can get access to some of these profiles that are just kind of contrary to what we have right now. We've concentrated the consumption profiles so heavily in the candy gas range that it's almost like you go to the store to buy a pie and you can only buy an apple pie. And there's many pies. And I'm just saying you need to open up the assortment of pies. And so that's I would say was like a really good breeding project, because I got to go run through the populations and look for the males that carried the traits. And it just took time to be able to put it all together.
And how do you test your males?
The male test is at first I'm looking at the male for traits of interest that I want to see, but then what I do is I mark it and I lay it into a known plant and I take a look to see what results came from it. And
so you're looking at progeny testing.
I'm looking at progeny testing, and I'm trying to see population ratios of, as I'm steering through, this male gave these impacts across what population, and that kind of lets me understand better its impact. And then I'm trying to line up the females that also carry that similar trait, so that what I'm trying to do is stack as much of that potential as possible, because it was such a recessive trait that if I had known how many years I was going to have to spend to really like hunt it out, I don't know if I would have done it. Right. I would have said, fuck, it's all right. I smoked it once. I liked it. But because it was so interesting, it was this crazy Tootsie Roll with like rose oil and cinnamon. And it was just this really beautiful matrix of that red Lebanese from BAM into Bob Hemphill's Puck line. And so and there was a lot of quality through the whole work. It was just really some really interesting consumptive cannabis. But I just happened to find a mouth that was just absolutely interesting. And so I just dove down the rabbit hole, and it didn't come out easily. And so what I wanted to do was just apply good breeding practices and play with it to see, could I steer the population to a more reasonable expectation without losing some of the other traits. And you started to notice link traits. You started to see patterns where you're able to see what profiles and what agronomic features come along with certain aromas, where as you saw the populations move, you could start to see these clusters. And so it's just fascinating to be able to actually, I would say, do professional breeding work. But that's why I never really got into it professionally, because my interest was in plant selection and then operational development and then market analysis, right? So like that was my base, was in hustling. And then in the actual craft of creating, but breeding requires, to me, like multi-year dives into a very specific direction. And that commitment, it has to be true. You can't lose track of anything you're doing through the process. And I was so caught up with looking at a million different plants that I had to choose one direction or another. I didn't think that I could do both accurately. And because my mother was a scientist, I think I had maybe higher expectations of what the word meant. And so I never deluded myself into saying I was that. Like, I'll definitely say I'm a selector, where I'm somebody who understands where a plant belongs. But the creator of it, I am fortunate that I got to spend so many years working with brilliant people that were developed in the process. And so I helped them understand what they're looking for. But then I was able to get the knowledge on kind of how to operate on a level. And I started studying dog breeding too, because the ability to change a dog's morphological traits is fast. And there's intangibles that you seek that move, and it's more recorded than cannabis. So it lets me understand how they create their first book of population, what comes into the population, and how you can really look at these coefficients of inbreeding to understand where you're going to start to stack negative traits. And so I started trying to like look at the process of cannabis breeding and cannabis fluidity through something that was also interesting to me, which was dog breeding. And so, and I noticed that when Bob Hemphill did his pup work, he did almost like a line breeding where he went back into the parental stock of all these varieties and sifted and worked to get to something that was pretty much what he was seeking, which was a replication of that 88 Skelly hash plant. And so you can, it's just neat, man. It's, I'm grateful that I got to be in the industry long enough that I got to really play around with a lot of stuff.
I found that really a lot of people do not understand what their males are doing because they don't spend the time to do true progeny testing.
It's you like, for me, what I realized was that if I take the time limit off and I just say that I'm doing it because I want to seek it, then it makes it easy because you're not trying to wonder when you're going to get to release the seeds to make the money so you can go to the next thing. And I think that you have to kind of, for companies, that's not the case. Companies that are in genomic development, they have timelines, and so there has to be expedited, and therefore it does limit. Like when you start to work the inbred lines that they're using to create these new F1 cultivars that are seed stable to a degree within a statistical, at least significant level of deviation, they work. That whole process of the compression and what does work and what doesn't, it's about pace. Where I think for the home grower, the individual who wants to just really dive into something in a direction, it's just really about not losing your focus on what you're doing, because otherwise then you really do get genetic drift. And genetic drift, I think people think it means the genes are moving, but genetic drift in terms of breeding terms means you're losing track of the traits of interest. So you're slowly moving away from the very reason you started. And once you move away enough, you've lost that genetic material you won't be able to get back. And I think that for people who wanted to do, work like stuff like I do, which is like, I would say like craft work, meaning small scale for a specific direction, they just have to be able to take the timeline away. They have to say it might take me 2 or 3 years to get what I want, but do I like it enough today that in 3 years from today, I'd still enjoy smoking it? So I make the decision of, this is just excellent cannabis. I don't give a fuck if it was 1970 or 2070. This would still be good weed. That lets me know that it's worth the work. And then I just keep logs. And and then you're able to, I do indoor work for stress testing, but I get to do outside work in a light depth to be able to get the numbers I need, because I want to see at least a couple hundred at a time. In a professional sift, for me, you're looking at 3,000, 4,000 of a population is a good size. But for the home sift, if we can do outdoor, you're able to look at a couple hundred at a time. It lets me pull some decent plants out of that cluster and then rerun those inside. That lets me see the impact, and it also gives me my stress test simultaneously. And then once you're able to kind of tie it in, you're able to now take that work and lock it up in seed form, and you can put it away. And you've made a contribution to the cannabis industry in a way that's kind of unique, where you've put a product into the world of potentiality that's been thoughtful. So you've selected for things that had good resistance. You've selected for things that have good effect. The visuals and the flavor are attractive, which means other people want to play with it. You yourself enjoy the consumption enough to where you don't care. When you put all that together, I think you're putting quality products into the system. And the ability to be able to, it's like my gal's a seed saver. She's like a natural propagator, but she does all the garden plants, does all the flowers. And so she's always gathering seed from everything so that every year she can go repollinate and create. And
is she part of the Seed Savers Exchange?
No, she just does this on her own as just someone who is naturally interested in plants and has a good knack for propagation. And so it's like I get to see like the original human. And so to me, that's kind of how I see a lot of people in cannabis, where if they're doing some decent work, you're putting good material into the world that allows other people to play with it and refine it. It's about interest. You have to get participation in order for things to really thrive. And if you make cannabis so difficult to access, if you make it so that the information's not present, you don't get people caught up. And it's hobbyists who become powerhouses. The desire to learn. I talked to a guy the other day from Australia, and it was amazing on his research, but he had been electrocuted on a job site. And I mean, like high voltage, it just blasted him, lost ability to walk, couldn't speak. I mean, a complete problem. And it's almost like it unlocked a pathway in his mind, because he becomes this like and I asked him, I said, what did you do prior to being electrocuted? He goes, I was a painter. He said, but I got electrocuted, and it set me down this rabbit hole about his body became so sensitized he could pick up what production methodology created the cannabinoids and the impact on his body due to the lipid production in the cannabis itself. And synthetic nitrogens did not create the same type of lipid profile on a molecular level, which allowed him to be able to instantly identify where it had been grown based off of the impact to him as this individual. So he goes and does this complete white paper on this. And he reached out to me kind of just to be an audience so that he could kind of spit it out for the first time in public. And I was amazed, and I thought he was a fucking physicist. And when he said to me, no, I was a house painter, but I got electrocuted, and this is the result, it was this understanding that for people who need to have a longer resonance in high, having these higher natural fat levels present in the cannabis plant itself facilitates that. And I didn't get that from a scientist as much as I got it from someone who was electrocuted, who was a house painter. And it was brilliant research. And so, to me, that's the interesting part of this, is that if you're able to add something positive to the system, what you get to live in is in a time unlike any other. We're communicating globally at a level that's never been done. And with cannabis right now, it's amazing. It's amazing. I trip out, man, because like hash church is legendary. More people probably get educated on hash production around the world through this forum than any other.
We hope so. That's definitely part of the mission.
Oh, without question. And it's because the fact that you get the ability to archive it and then bring that out. And so for me, as you get older, it's weird, but like when you're young, you're focused on just the work, and when you get older, you're focused on how is the work going to continue.
Kevin, I have a question.
Yeah.
You were touching on, you were talking about legal producers, and we know that most legal producers have only been around, we just say, within the last, 10 years, for the most part. Before that, everybody was basically reliant on happy accidents, right? For their new cultivar, as opposed to going down the serious selective process. What do you chalk that up to? Do you think it was, I know you talked about the time frame, but that's a missing piece, because there was so few people trying to do selection process correctly. I mean, we can literally name them almost on a hand, you know what I'm saying, who were doing it properly, stabilizing the genetics, growing out phenotypes properly so they could see the different ascensions, so they could figure out which one was the most dominant, so it would be a stable genetic. Whereas currently we're left with a whole bunch of genetics that were stacked on top of other people's via happy accidents.
I think that it's if you look at we'd say that we're going to call them like Gen Zero in the weed game in North America. It's material coming in, they're working with it. It's this process. The generation that comes after them, they are the one that comes after that. They begin to be really, they go from, we would say, seed production, organic outdoor production, to indoor production due to the drug war. The money changes the methodology. So all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, I don't have to build an organic microsystem in order to make the plant work. I can use a 3-part. And my dad, ran the seed. We run the clone. So it becomes like first like a cultural shift, because if the money's the same or the money's more, typically people go where the money is. And so what we did is we took what I think is some of the best seed breed. Like when I got to Humboldt in 90, what I saw then was the last of the collections from homesteads, because homesteads were built predominantly off grid. And so for all those years you had cannabis production, it was by off grid operations, and they always created seed stock. And when you would go to harvest parties, when you go to people's, collections, every farm, every group had their own individual worked product. The line had been saved, developed, and worked, and it fit them. And the market was big enough to take what was produced, and there wasn't so much product to choke off the market. So the market was big enough to take all this variation, so each person could effectively work a direction and get paid for it adequately to allow them to believe it was a good direction. When we get into the explosion of cannabis consumption and access through basically 215 forward, where you start to have 15,000 dispensaries in California, and the money was pouring in, rarely do people go backwards in their effort, meaning they always try to apply less effort to make more money. If I can work 1 hour and make 1,000, why would I work 10? And because you still got rewarded for it, because the vacuum was sucking, people started, I think, to dumb down in the realities of what it is that they were doing. So when you reward people too much money, so I mean, people all the time give me this fucking story about like I'm like a freedom fighter. I'm like, dude, you were growing a fucking indoor in a garage. I was a medical provider. I'm like, and who are you fucking providing to? So the idea that like we were all cannabis fucking heroes, that's not real. It was just you were part of a culture that was doing something at a time. Were there heroes? Yes. But was every single person a hero? No. Well, when you start to see yourself heroic and you start to see yourself overly rewarded for what you do, you start to believe you're fucking smart. So the money was so thick that it made everybody kind of dumb. And we took good cultivation practices and we took good genetic practices of stability, reliability, uniformity, and the ability that we were gathering epigenetic information from each generation that we did the sequence on, because it was done at the same location, right? So over the course of 7 years, you've added 7 years of selection and information to that gene pool through the influence of the environment. What you had was incredible fucking genes. People took select clones out of that and ran it indoor. And it began that collapse. And so now I think that with the internet, what I see this unbelievably talented, small 2-light, 4-light community emerge globally, where the best quality stuff is these small operations that are absolutely driving towards a direction of exquisite. And they're the ones that aren't seen because their product's not in the store. But the commercial operations, you basically create an operation based off a deck. The deck dictates what you're going to do. And some of these decks say, hey, we turn 7 times a year. We do 750s. We do 660s. You can't grow fucking plants of any diversity in that type of constraint. So
24 pages on the deck and not one mention of crop loss anywhere on the deck.
You can't talk, and you got to talk about a level of canopy per square foot that's fucking unbelievable. There's no human could even move in the space.
Wade had his hand up, so I would like to go to Wade. He was.
Thank you, Marcus. I'll start with. I'm loving this conversation because it's about exploring the variations of the cannabis plant. that we have access to. And I got to say that I've never claimed to be a breeder. I have done a very small scale version of what you're talking about, Kevin, of looking for versions of the plant that provide certain benefits. And I wanted to put out there, if you will, an off-grid, low-key hippie way of getting to selecting the plants that work for the people you're trying to help. So again, I'm talking about the medical side of the cannabis work. And what I used to do for a number of summers, I knew families who had children or persons who were suffering with one thing or another, and particularly the kids. If I was able to have the family come to the farm and walk among the plants, it was amazing to me that something brought those kids to a plant that would help them. And I'm talking in that time frame, epilepsy, autism spectrum disorder, cancer, just different kids that I had the chance to meet. And their families, yeah, the parents would bring them to the farm. And I'm putting it out there because I know the opportunities to do what I was doing back then are limited now. But I think there's something going on there with the connection between those persons and the plant. And maybe it's the smell, maybe it's the look, maybe I don't know what it was, but I was pretty stunned again and again to see kids selecting plants that I would have selected based on what I knew of the genetics and the chemistry in that plant. So I'm just saying, you don't have to be a scientist. You just have to be interested and try. That's the other thing. Just go out there and, if you're not to Sam's point, if you're not killing a bunch of things, you're not doing it right, but you're probably not going to mess up offering cannabis products to folks in need, and give them some credit for being able to identify what it is that's likely to give them the benefit they're seeking. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks, Wade.
Beautiful.
Well, we've been going for 3 hours solid. We got about 407 people watching live right now. Hash Church has been pretty banging this 5.0 series, so I'm stoked to go for
Almost
another
420,
hour. Go as deep as
right?
we can. Yeah, was it?
Almost 420,
Oh,
So we
almost.
got
Okay, yeah.
all your friends and tell your friends to come get high with us right now.
Yeah, we need 4 more people and we'll all light up. Or 14 more people, sorry.
Kevin, thank you for coming in and sharing your knowledge with us. What your work has been legendary in Northern California, and your certification program has caused people to wonder, how is it pronounced? Is it pronounced Gangier? Gangier? How is it properly pronounced?
It's pronounced Gangier. My son came up with the name I bet he came up with the name 11 years ago. And so he was raising 28 right now. So when he was, still a teenager with braces, we're hanging out in my kitchen. And all my life, I was, basically you're a dope grower. And because, that's what I do. So to me, you have to be able to say what you can do in a sentence or you're full of shit. If I ask you what you do for a job and it takes you a fucking week to tell me, I know you're lying. You should be able to tell me what the core job is you do. And so for most of my career, it was like dope grower. And then it kind of switched into like propagator because I did so much clonal production. So someone said, "What do you do, Kevin Cannabis?" I'm propagator. And all of a sudden I started doing all this cannabis work that was just really eclectic. And I was sitting in my kitchen and I was high and I asked my son, I said, what the fuck do you call yourself when you do all this stuff? Because otherwise it's a whole list of shit and you look like you're a pretentious asshole. I'm an operator. I'm a farmer. I'm fucking this. I said, there must be a word. And he said, "Dad, you're a gangier." And I said, "And what is that?" He goes, "It's a cannabis culturalist." He said, "You're all things herb." He goes, "You just basically live in the world of herb." And I just loved the word. And so we created a media company from it. and I used it to develop all the Golden Tarp Awards, all the seasonal spring events,
So
and
it's
then we
based
partnered
off
with Green Flower.
sommelier,
Correct,
basically.
yeah. And
Yeah,
my son, yep, and ganja was, and I said, how'd you choose ganja? And he said, because you always used the word ganja when I was a little kid. He said, so to me, ganja was like my first introduction to weed as a word. And so ganjier became that phrase. And I said, man, I said, I love it. I said, I'm going to try to get it into the dictionary one day. And he was laughing. He's like, get the fuck out of here. But we did. We turned it into a known phrase. And for us, the ganjier, I didn't do a certification because I didn't think I was qualified. I don't think any one person is qualified. It was when Green Flower approached me and said, hey, we're going to put together a council, and the totality of the council let me realize that we might be able to get some consensus of how to look at something objectively. And so I think that when we did that, it took 2.5 years of work to get to that point. I think it was some of the best work I've ever done in cannabis, because everyone understood that if we could really understand what occurred, when we think about sommelier, when we think about these upper level Epicurean products, most of our education is really from France. And so people don't understand how that whole process occurred. They don't understand the impetus for it. They don't understand the timeline. And when you can kind of go back and really take a look and help people understand that what you have to do is you have to have common language, we have to have agreement, we have to have support, and what it does, and fair support, where you're highlighting products regardless of position and brand. So a good product is a good product regardless, a bad product's a bad product regardless. Once we can start to have that kind of agreement and understanding and a common language how to look at something objectively, you start to value all products differently. And so, like right now with the scandal in California over the pesticide shit, right? That should hopefully fucking change the way they look at these products, where if they find you have a toxic product that isn't listed in the system, but you're using it to skirt a safety law, it's like you're playing the molecular game. You're choosing to go a route that's not on a banned list, but if they caught you with it, they'd instantly ban it. So that LA Times situation, that brings it out. What that does, it brings more awareness. You have to have awareness in all facets. Is the product clean? And how do we judge decent product? And now that information gets put out to the public, so the customers have some fucking clue what to do. Because the dispensaries can't provide you with the information you need. It's most people who buy weed, even though they've been buying weed their whole lives, they're not used to buying weed from a selection. If you bought weed your whole life from your neighbor, you know that you get a cookie or a brownie or a granola bar that they make, or you get this type of flour, that type of flour. But when you have fucking 300, 400, 500, 700 choices in front of you, it gets overwhelming. And I just think that the mainstream buyer, it's not who is already knowledgeable. That's where we fuck up this picture in terms of cannabis, is that we're constantly saying this isn't this, but it's about who's coming into cannabis. Because to us, the industry's old. We've spent our whole life in it, but it's brand new for so many. And it's for the first time anybody's ever had access at this level so simply. And it's trying to be able to create the ability for people to see a product correctly. And it's also for the ability to understand the timeline of events on how you got here, so that when you look at these products, you can understand the medical pioneers that risked their lives to give it to you, and all the people that were Black, Asian, and brown who got fucked so that they could remove this from you. And that's really the ganjier. The ganjier has got a really good historical background, educational component, so that you really do get an idea of where you are in history right now, and then how do we possibly look at something objectively.
So here's a question for you. The word ganja, your son said, because you always call it ganja, Dad. I'm wondering where that influence came with. And of course, I would think it must be connected somehow to Jamaica.
Well, it was, the way I remember it was that ganja was the first time cannabis was discovered. The word ganja is out of Sanskrit. And so the first time the word ganja is ever discovered in history is on a fucking rock, on a rock tablet. And so to me, I was like, whoa, ganja is this, original phrase. And then of course we know it from Jamaica, but for some reason I got turned on to that little tidbit early, and it just kind of stuck with me. And then my son must have, heard it come out of my mouth enough to make it that piece. But that was the whole thing, was that I used the Ganjier as this killer online platform for education, and it allowed me to be able to. And it was just because the name was cool and I enjoyed it, and then we took it and made a media company out of it. But when I was able to partner with Green Flower, what it did was it allowed us to create that council of 18 people so that we could. And it was funny too, because we all first got together, we were basically yelling at each other because we're all fighting over what we think is right. And we started to laugh, and we realized that we needed to put down all our preconceptions and really allow what was right to emerge in that way. And it was heavy because, like, I got to work with Frenchie on it, but it was his birthday the other day, and we were hanging out up at the campus, and it was really nice to be able to spend those years with Frenchie working on that project and him bringing an incredible perspective of how do you weave the protection of the region into the recognition of the product, which is what, like, you in BC have the same situation where you have these historical regions of production, and they do have an impact, and they do have a validity. How do you make that work so that the people who are in those regions who have done this work get to derive benefit? And part of that benefit is keeping that land in these continuous ownership tracks, so it becomes generational. And that was Frenchie's piece, and I think that his impact, like in Northern California, was so profound because it really drove the awareness of the Appalachian issue and how to create that valuation. And because I got to spend so much time in that 2012 time period with them, it allowed me, when I got to speak to the Senate in 2017, 2016, about Appalachian creation here. And so the individuals that, come together to create a thing, I don't think sometimes we understand how much impact they have on other people. So it's profound. That's why I always say the people that have good online platforms that have a lot of conversation and a lot of diverse people that come through, and they're incredible because the agenda is discussion, and it allows people some great benefit.
I have another question for you. That is, okay, everybody knows that some terpenes have the ability to modulate or even potentiate THC. And I think Ethan might have come up with the entourage effect or so. Okay, my question is, do you think that thiols have the ability to modulate and potentiate THC, or do you think they just are strong aroma molecules?
I'm not a chemist, so I don't know about the potentiation of the THC, but I know that when I was looking at a hop study someone was involved in, and when they changed I want to say it was a thiol or it was a volatile sulfur, maybe an ester, but when they changed one of those molecules by a ppb, so they had two identical hops samples, and it was in breeding project, and they were showing what happens in terms of impact on a minor, and they had only 1 part per billion difference between them in one specific molecule, and it made sample A undistinguishable from sample B. So when we're talking about, to me, in terms of interpretation, that's the part that you don't really, even when I look at like essays from Israel, where I have friends that do genetic development in Israel, and they use Dee Dee Mary's lab to do all the work. So the essays are incredible. So when I look at them, I'm not qualified to tell you anything on it. I just look at it to see the totality, so I can understand how much more we're really being able to see in terms of this collection. And what I know is that we can only kind of make, I would say, assumptions or empirical from the observation of, like, I consumed it and I noticed the difference. But I know that when we're using these type of aroma profiles to steer direction, we can definitely anticipate the potentiality for possible direction, right? So I can't tell you if I'm going to have a greater THC effect, but I can say that the volatile components steer how people perceive the high to be. And if the cannabinoids follow suit, which they would in native populations, you can kind of predict an outcome.
Yeah. Well, with terpenes, it was relatively straightforward
Mm-hmm.
to test uh, pure THC by itself, then by vaporization, 25 milligrams, and then do the same thing with it spiked with a single terpene. And if you were to do that double blind, so you don't know what you're doing, uh, either the person who's giving it to you or the person who's getting it, you could really easily perceive that some terpenes do have the ability to modulate, and a few even potentiate THC.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really curious about the files if they can do the same thing or not, because files are the next. Well, after terpenes hit the cannabis community in the early 2000s, now thiols and a few other compound volatiles are quickly. My focus has always been recreational, and
Mm-hmm.
I want to know what's it going to do to it.
Totally. And the problem with testing this though is because they're so volatile, you don't see it captured, right? So much of the, and it's the cost. So for farmers, like, we're already getting soaked on a COA, and it you don't get an essay big enough to give you the information. And I almost want to say the honest truth is the more you give this scientific information to the consumer as pure science, the more you confuse them, because what the consumer to me wants is satisfaction. They're coming in with a reason, they want to leave satisfied. And so it's very simple to me to deal with people because I know that it's the outcome that they're there for. And so when they start to get this information, it's same thing now. They're like, oh, I steer by terpenes. And I'm like, that doesn't really help you though. The problem is that every test that has been done has been in isolation. It's been a single molecule compared to a molecule, and they add another molecule. We have maybe 5,000 molecules in this package. So like, how does that correlate? It's the same. It's like with aromatherapy. Aromatherapy is nice, but you're not smoking that shit. And for people that say, it's only the terps that I like, I'm like, have you ever vaporized them? Because I mean, holy shit, that stuff is caustic. So I think that the complexity of the product in terms of the individual still has to be like an interpretation where you're able to run it through groups and say, okay, are we seeing, what are we seeing?
It's the dose that makes the
That
poison.
is exactly what.
Yes, it's titration. It's
the
being
dose
able to
that makes
measure the
the poison.
titration for repeatability, and that lets you make an assessment. So like when we do an assessment, if you're doing flower, you got to record the amount you consumed.
Oh yeah, well,
All that shit. Like when we're doing a real assessment, every little detail's got to get covered so that I'm able to give you the assessment, and then you can go follow the same protocol and find out, hey, where's our differences?
I did that with
I've
15
noticed
subjects,
I've noticed the
and
same
we
thing when
were.
doing the terps with. I've noticed the same thing when doing the terps with Sam over in Amsterdam. If you put too much on the extract, it blows out the flavor and your lungs in a totally different way. Hey, bud.
That's why we spiked it with this really tiny amount.
Yeah, well, you can't like those, like you said, those thiols are so damn volatile that I don't think that you can actually get the right amount. I think that you're never going to be testing within levels that are equivalent to the physiology of the plant. And like I
That
just
might
typed in
be
our chat
possible
here too.
because I was sent some files by abstract, and I haven't tried it yet because I've been trying to figure out how to do this.
Well, and how do you open the vial without like
They
blowing
are all
the whole
escaping.
head?
My
Yeah,
wife,
you're gonna do it in cryo.
My
So
wife won't let me do it inside the house.
She's not wrong. But like I really don't think that these molecules modulate THC itself. I think they modulate the experience. And it's like anything gustatory. Like you're in a restaurant and you've got herbs in a specific dish that are adding something to the flavor. They're not doing anything neurochemically. They're changing your perception of the experience,
Yeah, but
right?
for
And I think
example,
that that's kind of how they,
the terpenes do though. The
and that's why
terpenes
like
do.
limonene, like, go ahead.
No, I was just saying the terpenes do modulate the experience, absolutely. And some of them potentiate it. They make the THC stronger because when you do this and every subject agrees with, because we did a 100 question organoleptic survey before and after, and there's no doubt that the terpenes can do it. But I'm still, but everybody's talking about thiols, and my big question is,
Yeah, but they don't do it through an interaction with THC is what I'm saying. They do it just like that's why aromatherapy works, right? Like, I mean, linalool breaks down into a molecule that binds to GABA, which is the receptor that interacts with benzodiazepines, right? So that has nothing to do with THC. It's just a separate channel that's being activated at the same time as you're taking the THC. So
Ask
okay,
Johnny.
but
Ask Johnny about when I visited him in the well, geez, it was like the department where everyone has broken necks and broken backs. He had just had some crazy spinal operation or vertebrae taken out of his neck or something. He would obviously know better than me. But when I put that purple punch terpene profile, I wouldn't call it terpenes because more than likely it's a volatile organic compound profile. But we put that under his nose. I had 18 different flavor profiles derived from cannabis, and that one had him like hopping right out of bed. Remember that, Johnny B?
Oh, it was a game changer for me because that's when Save the Terps came into play, right? I said right there, Save the Terps. It became a major campaign over years with Bovida. That was a huge awakening for me, understanding that it was the terpenes were modulating the THC. That took my pain away. It's 3D imaging. It override the brain functions. I learned about this and I was
but
able to get.
again, they're not modulating the THC. They're modulating the pain at the same time as you're
No,
experiencing.
this was my belief. So let me thank you for saying that, Ryan. I appreciate that. I was like, what's going on here? Like all of a sudden my brain's going off like this, and I remember pulling it back towards me. I was like, give me that. And like you were here, Ryan, when I'm smelling certain teas. I'm like, you're like, okay, this is what it's attached to. This is what helps me with my pain. It was those
Yeah.
terpenes was such a big part of being able to be identify. That's why it's a big thing with me is about saving terps. It's about giving some kind of a standard of holding that cannabis at a freshness stage so we get the same terpene profile for patients. It's a big thing for me. And that was a huge eye opener for me of working with Dr. Hornby for over a decade of trying to standardize medical cannabis for patients. We did it with try to do it with nutrients, try to do it with lighting, try to do it with decarboxylating. And it was like, it was the terps for me. All of a sudden, it was like, it's the terps. This is what was helping me, right? That's what I
and do the terps give as much effect without THC, or synergistically are they better together?
better together. Everything's better
Okay.
definitely better together. And that's when I was looking at even with the book and talking about certain things with different terpenes and Ryan mentions that and stuff. That was the biggest eye opener for me. That was the game changer, and that was in 2015. They took out my C4, C5 because someone rented me while busy texting on their damn phone. So get off your phone, stop texting, you're driving. You see that sticker probably all over the world. It was really understanding that those terpenes was everything for me. That's where it became just so profound, and it was saving those terps. Patients need that profile. They need to be able to identify what's going to work for them.
Well, I absolutely agree with you, Johnny, because what we did first was we smoked pure THC, 25 milligrams, vaporized in a volcano. And it had, effects you would expect from THC. But then I smoked 25 milligrams, I vaporized again in a volcano, of dry sip skunk number one that was only 70% THC. And let me tell you, the the terpene rich one was twice as strong subjectively as the the pure THC. So
Mhm.
it's obvious that they're a significant part of the picture.
Yeah. Well, I like what Rob always says too. If cannabis was just THC, he wouldn't be a consumer, right? It's the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I really believe that.
It's
Well,
always the smell that gets you excited, you know?
Well,
it
Come
does,
it's
on.
but people
it's no
sense a
different.
smell of changing, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I don't on purpose though, right? Like I don't use scented laundry soap. I don't use scented soap. I don't have any kind of aroma shit around me. So the only so it's natural aroma, and it just allows me to develop my olfactory skills better. But so when I'm doing assessment and I'm able to pick, it's kind of like sommelier shit where you and perfume. So I looked at sommelier and perfume and how they work and develop, and a lot of it is having this clarity of olfactory ability, and I don't think people have developed theirs adequately because we've been living in a world of perfume for so long. So most individuals are really, in order for an aroma to really hit them in a nuance, it has to penetrate that filter that they've put in from too much Febreze at the house, too much Tide soap. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it is a kind of bad thing. It's an endocrine blocker, but it definitely messes up your olfactory ability. And so we we don't have the same level of scent capability as like our ancestors. So when I when I do look at scent and I look at animals, I look at bears and dogs for how do they pick up aroma, how do they contain it in their mind and then sift out what it is, what's the skill set. And I think that human beings at one point in time had a far greater ability to differentiate odor, and we used our noses so much more intimately for survival. And as we've been spoon fed safety, we've lost that ability. And cannabis is something that I think speaks to us in a primal way. So when people smell it, it starts to begin this recognition that you're sensing through your nose things that are inherently good for your needs.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about that last week with this terpene language, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
this language that's spoken between fungi and bacteria, like these all these organisms produce terps,
Mm-hmm.
right?
They
And
do. They
about,
do.
like these tritrophic or like these three biological level interactions where the tree, there's a beetle that attacks the pine tree, and the pine tree upregulates a terpene, and that terpene is an attractant to a wasp that is parasitic to the beetle. Right. So you have these like multi layers of biology all interacting together through these terps. And I kind of look at it like, it's like the difference of being in a city and looking up at the sky and not being able to see the stars versus going out in the country and looking up in the sky, right? Like you're overwhelmed with the light, and that light kind of desensitizes you to this natural light that's coming from the stars, right? And it's kind of the same thing with scent. Like if your system is always being bombarded with all this scent, you're not as sensitive to the natural language that's going on beneath it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And corporations use this stuff like intentionally, like we've talked about this before, but there's a reason that all these companies put like lemon cleaner or lemon scented cleaner, right? Like that limonene molecule actually improves your mood without THC.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that's part of the corporation fooling you that your cleaner is really working in your house.
Oh,
It's
it's like
like
it's
they're
like
just
foaming toothpaste.
yeah, they're
Toothpaste
just
doesn't
feeding.
have to foam; it's a foaming agent because they discovered the more foam that came out. And then they I was reading the review on it, and they said that they went to such a level that the shit was spewing out of your mouth when you were brushing, and they had to throttle back on the toothpaste formula.
Yeah, they're fooling us with these
Yeah.
these chemicals, right, to make
Mm-hmm.
us believe something more about their product. So there's
Well,
definitely
I can definitely see that they are fooling us. There's no doubt about it. I also see that on the flip side, the people who, because Kev's right in the sense that a large portion of people have a muted olfactory sense or a capability. But there's still this very small percentage of people, which even for sommeliers make up a very small percentage
Mhm.
of society. They have the ability to do this sensory science. They have a heightened olfactory. I myself have a very heightened olfactory. My wife only ever understood it 3 times, which was each time she got pregnant and her sense of smell went through the roof. And she'd be like, "Oh my God, is this how you're living?" And I'd be like, "Yes, exactly. There's way more bad smells in the world than there are good." So when you create a heightened sense of smell and olfactory, it's not necessarily all like butterflies and rainbows. There's like
No.
a bunch of bad shit out there that you smell in a deeper way, the same way you can smell these compounds in a deeper way. So yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of the people in the hash world in particular, people like Nick T, people like Matt Rise, people like myself, people like obviously Skunkman Sam, people that just have this incredible olfactory, they know what they're looking for, so they're more likely to find it. And that regardless if they're Sam and they, are the super anomaly and go and collect seeds and breed and do all the work themselves, or if they're more like myself or Matt or Nickety, who are people that could find the fire. We always like magnetically would find it. And that's why, the three of us in particular made spectacular hashes because we linked up with people. I mean, like Sub Cool. Shit, Frenchie was another one for that matter. Sub Cool, say whatever you want about him, man. That guy was the homie, and every cultivar I ever grabbed from him and ran through bags turned to water. It was just full melt hash. So, got to give my shout out to the TGA weed nerds.
Has anybody here lost their sense of smell? I actually lost my sense of smell for a decade
Oh my
completely.
God, that's terrifying, dude. Don't even talk about that. How
No.
could you?
No, it happened to me during the Gulf War. And one day I was sitting, a decade later, I'm sitting at home with my roommate Nate. And guess what's the first thing that I smelled when it turned back on?
Weed?
Of course, Johnny's like, weed. No, it was a dog fart.
A dog fart.
I was
So when
gonna
you
say a
say
fart.
That's
when you
hysterical.
say, that all smells are not beautiful, I have to concur because yeah, the overwhelming smells of death that I smelled during combat shut down my smell, and it affected my taste, everything. And then randomly one day, in '99, it just popped back on just randomly. So
I,
That's so
I, I
awesome.
want to mention that when I had COVID-19 in 2020, I lost my sense of smell completely for a month or two. And I was really, really worried. I said, how am I going to be able to smell weed again? And yeah, but it, it it's normal again, which is, yeah, some people say I have a super nose, which I guess is useful in the perfume industry.
I was just
Or
going to
the,
say that, Sam. It's the perfume is what I studied because I was just curious. So like when you talk about olfactory ability, where's it really measured? And it was in people that smell food, but it was in perfume because a perfume, the commonality among the best perfume developers, people that could pick up like 70 layers, they could identify 70 different components in something, was that they all were raised in the country. They all had an organic, as a phrase, background. That none of them that were premium at any of these houses that make perfume, none of their top people in any of them came from the city. It was that they're from birth, their olfactory memory was developed from this myriad of aromas that were constantly pulsating because it was living material creating it. So releasing different molecular waves as they off gas through the day and collected at night. So the amount of overall information these people received from where they were raised gave them a memory that lets them identify and recreate that.
Well, that and the fact that they weren't exposed to toxic fucking perfumes their entire lives. So they had a fucking sensitive enough olfactory that they could smell and decipher what was in toxic
Yep.
perfumes.
The flavor and aroma company I was working with, it was a French company called Jodfrey Rouge, and they came to my lab and tested skunk marijuana and skunk hashish because they wanted to make a perfume. And I told them I had almost 100 terpenes that I was using for my FID GC analysis, and they told me they they had I think it was 12,000 or something like that terpenes in their collection, standard.
Wow.
Damn, they flexed on you, Sam.
I think it's
They
seems
did analyze my skunk hash and my and they identified I think it was 60 or 70 or 80 different peaks, which I found interesting.
Go ahead, Brian. Best friend farms in the house. Welcome, homie.
hey there. Right in line with what Sam was just like talking about, where this the seeking out of the skunk profile and where he's finding so many is really interesting. But I just also interesting seems the pull to say like foul, raunchy, or disgusting really terps that come in, to cannabis or hash that actually have a pleasant pull for people into cannabis, where you don't really see that. I don't in other places. I guess with cheese would be one, and I'm sure there are other places where the raunchy terps take over and actually pull people in and attract them.
A friend of mine in the Bay Area got a variety from Afghanistan, and he named it KGB, like the Russian secret police. And two things that was interesting about that variety. Number one was it smelled like rotten meat. I mean, really foul. The second thing that was interesting was if you got any resin on your fingers or your hands would break out with a rash temporarily. If you got it anywhere near your eyes, you would lose your vision and your eyes would get all puffy for like half an hour. But what was really funny was when you dried the weed a couple of weeks and outgassed it, then you could manicure it with no trouble with your hands or your face. So it was, I don't know if it was a terpene or a thiol because I didn't have the equipment back in those days because this was in the 70s. But
Did the smell change?
rotten meat.
Did that smell change, Sam, once it cured? Did it go still to rotten meat, or was it a different
No,
smell?
it didn't. It smelled vaguely like rotten meat, but nothing like before.
Ah,
And yeah, it just tasted more like some sort of an Afghan skunky type. But yeah, I mean, it would gag me if I smelled it. And if I got it too close to my face or my hands, it literally made my hands break out with a rash.
Holy shit. It's
did
the
other people?
durian of weed.
Yeah. Ooh, that one's raunchy.
You don't like baby diaper vomit smell?
Rotten eggs.
Dude, I want to show your piatella again because we were doing that, and I want you to explain what it is while I'm showing it because yeah, Brian's just been having all sorts of fun with like curing out full melt bubble. This is like a 6-star bubble hash that he's cutting up with his knife right now. Tell us about this thing, dude.
Oh,
So good.
what do you want to hear about it? Just like what it is, or what
Yeah,
are we?
just how you went about doing it, what it smells like. I want to know what it smells like. There's my piece you're cutting. Look at that. Twice as fat as all the others.
That's a really nice looking hash.
Oh, thank you. So this one here is actually like really savory, sharp, I would put it. There's no sweet to it. So the gas mask that I work with for like 5 to 6 years and 4 or 5 generations, 4 solid, kind of like working within those. I brought back a BX2 male to the GMO clone. And this particular pheno like was what I was looking for in terms of happy medium, like a merry meeting ground for both types came in. So it came GMO forward, as it says there, but it also gave it like a texture from the gas mask for the hash that you can see like the shine on the hash there and everything. So it's got and the wiggle. So it's got like a creamy textural, I guess, good addition to it from that side, the male side. And yeah, so the hash itself is what I guess people were calling piatella these days, but this is just a cured melt and like a 2 month cure job. And yeah, kind of, I guess it does pertain to like our talk with genetics quite a lot, because I'm kind of like tracking on my own small scale for a lot of like pleasure and enjoyment of the hash and of the flower, but I'm also, like seeing different genetic variations or different genetic line. This gas mask of mine I've been using or working for like 5 to 6 years just has a lot of the like really texture, taste, smell, checks boxes for me. So I've been working that as like a stable and staple line for other things that I'm making, basically adding it to. This is another pheno you're showing there, a BX1.
Dude, what about your little trick? Like, how do you get this shit to cure out? Everyone wants to know. Like, for me, I'm glad you said piatella, or it's just cured bubble hash, right? It's a 6-star. Really, why piatella is so super special is because the main ingredient is 6-star bubble hash. So just 6-star bubble hash alone. But yeah, this stuff just looks soaked. Like the turds just.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's definitely wet. That would pertain like to the cultivar. A lot of it, I really just, it's not in the processing that brings that grease out. It's definitely in terms of the genetic, at least for me. And then the grease pops out of it. I guess basically if it's there genetically, but then there's also the process to it, which I guess to throw some pieces out with the piatella thing is I don't put the plastic onto the hash until I actually form the hash by hand. So that's at the very end that I touch it by hand and I make my slabs. But, happy to share other pieces out there too. This is what I would call a pre-whip. So my first whip, I do a couple two movements of the hash, stirring or moving. And this one is like right out of the freeze dryer into the bucket. And then I just start moving it around, get it a little warm, room temp or a little above. And if they're greasy cultivars, they really only take a few minutes to melt right down to grease. And from that point there, I would go, a cold cure, or even honestly up to like a room temp hold with the lid on and dark and dry, or, make sure it stays dark dry. And basically after that forms up to a hardened texture again, goes to cure, what's called cure. I would then work it again, like make it soft again. So maybe some of those pieces help. I don't add the plastic till the very end when I have like the hash looking like what I want it to.
Dude, that shit was hypnotic, dude, when you were whipping the bubble. So whipping the bubble is really quite a good tip in regards to speeding up the piatella process.
Yeah, it's like soft hash. I guess like even though I'm watching my own little videos, I'm making little geeky videos, it's definitely the best. That I believe is a Coastal Collision. That's a Sour D by SFE and from Melting Pot Friend. But basically, yeah, like it's soft hash. So you want to, not every cultivar will go into being soft at the end. And like the Gasmo you first showed, why I was stoked on it was because the gas mask added the creamy, greasy texture to it, where it's more of a stiff or grainy resin is what I call it. It's, dumps hash and it's really sharp foul, but it's really stiff. It makes good, cured melt piatella form, but not that really wet looking greasy cut stuff. So
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Piatella for me, obviously when it first kind of came out and people were doing it, I was more of the understanding that the Spanish people were really liking because it was giving them a texture that they could take full mouth bubble and just break it into spliffs quite easily, a little harder than, trying to do snakes and whatnot. And that's really what popularized it. But what the value I see of it is when you get hash like that, and I'm sure when you pre-Piatella that and you've got your bubble hash, it's probably caramelly and fairly hard and pure. And once you whip it and soften it up, and then you let it sit in the loaf and you wrap it up, and those terps try to exhaust and volatilize out of the hash, they foam it up a little bit. They create a very stable texture that kind of doesn't change for a very long time. Like you can leave Piatella out at room temperature for a fairly long time before it like dries out. Go ahead, you want to show something?
no, kind of, well, not to cut you off, and thanks for saying that. It's definitely part of this process is actually bringing it. You can see that's a little drier, and I've scraped a little back, and it's actually amazing how wet that will go with some light pressure. And, hand formation or whatnot. Basically, pressure and movement. I try not to add any heat to be meant, done in the cold. I myself like the Piatella form or the cured melt that I originally called bubble cream. I like that cured melt form either way, whatever it's called, because it's a stable, like a table stable form. And, doesn't take extra protocol just to keep the hash fresh or at a certain point of isolation. So it's got this truth factor to it that is like, it's from fresh frozen, but it's given the time to get there where it's actually cured and able to handle it. If you want to keep it long term, you could fridge or freeze it, but it's really good on, room temp, table stable stuff. Easy for like anyone to enjoy it that way. And then further, I actually find that at least for my hash, I'm seeing a lower temp melt that in the banger, and like it basically goes in really easy and melts very even and thorough, more like a rosin than I would see like a fresh granular melt, or even like so for the dabbing side of it. So I actually really enjoy the dabbing, and it brings out the smell. The terpenes just pop on it once you go to cure and then beat it up again. So I think one of the most important things for me with making this is I do a twice whip, or like a twice, moving it right up front, make it soft, let it stiffen up, and then go back in and make it soft again once it's stiffened up. And then
Well, I'm telling you, at the next Legends of Hash I do, I want a giant projector and I want it to just be on a loop, that whipping of that hash, dude, because that
so
was completely hypnotic. I don't
it's
know if
so fun
anyone else was feeling that or if that was just my weird
I think I like it because that myself, not just fun, but because once again, it goes back to like the cultivar where some do and some don't. And, we're like, not saying scratch all of them that don't, but if you're after really greasy hash or that type of a hash form, then basically probably try to eliminate the grainier hash types, even if they do make hash or dump hash. But, and I would say eliminate, get rid of, but you either probably got to breed it forward or go, you know what I mean? Go to something else. For me, it's that my gas mask line, which is the kosher Kush on a original Mac 1's brother onto headband clone. So both the kosher and the headband were old clones, handed, and I had to have like something in between it to bring them together, basically. And I get like super grease component, like all these types relate actually back to that original diesel headband, different names for it, to that type of texture quality. And then the kosher's just, this cut here is one of my favorites, and one of my
These are
favorites.
fatty heads, huh? You don't even have 90 or 73 in there?
I actually do a lot of 90, but I like that these you're showing because for the last year or so on the indoor organic, and I'm like the 13th, 14th cycle on the living soil with this batch. I'm seeing, I don't know if they're like cultivar oriented or just ripeness oriented, but I saw a kick up over the last year for me for like really good return, but also super high quality on the 120. Yeah. So playing with both of those, I'd say always more 90. Yeah. Yeah.
Seems like trichome production is ever changing. There's definitely was a point where people weren't collecting like 180 and 190 micron heads that were melting and boiling at when being lit up. So very nice. That is absolutely beautiful. That is kind of like the end result right there in a nutshell. Everything we've been talking about from flavor profiles and breeding and growing and relationships and storytelling. It's like that shit right there. Oh,
It's
enough
got a lot of
said.
truth.
Mic
Yeah,
drop.
truth hash.
I'm almost certain everyone on this panel right now wants that hash.
Oh,
Can
it's
we
true.
get a raise of hands on everyone that wants that hash?
Nice. You guys are too kind. I would happily share, at least digitally, try to share some here. I think I got a little slab I can share up on there. You know, some more Gazmo. Let's see what we got here.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I'll just grab a little bit of
Hash that good, Brian, and you saying
Right
culture
in there.
really making my day.
Ah, you guys make my day every time.
You get to do a nice fresh dab now.
Do an extra, a triple.
Yeah, that was a beautiful grab. I mean, that's gonna happen when it was like reach in and grab and go, thank you.
Virtual grab.
Virtual grab. I was like, I gotta jump in on that right now.
Virtual grab on dab. Yeah, nice. Well, I love hash, so thanks for sharing and thanks for, having me here to share the hash and learn so much from everybody that comes on here.
Well, thanks for doing it, man. Holy, right?
It's
It's the
literally
people
my
that are
pleasure.
doing it. Look, and here's
No, that's the
another
nicest
one.
hash I've seen in ages. That's really
Fucking hell,
fantastic.
dude. This is a totally different one now again. This is the sour banana sherbet melt
Yeah.
waves.
I think the AJ Sour really brought that out, that grease component to the original diesel or the diesel family. I love the diesel original ECSD and OG Kush, True OG cut. I worked with out west for better part of 10 years. It was like one of my favorites, produced it over and over. So I'm definitely a gas lover. I like that family, that profile.
Proper viscosity for preferred cured texture. Oh yeah.
Kind of like a
Spicy.
texture geek too.
I just want the world to have access to this. That's all. The whole world doesn't have to smoke this. I totally understand. Some people love to get pre-rolled joints, and I want you guys to get the best version of that that's possible. And people that want, even the distillate and botanical terps, okay, you guys, I'm not going to fight you. Do that over there if you need to. People that want to get organic cannabis and really experience the different flavor profiles and maybe get a deeper understanding about what cannabis is and what the flavor profiles even are, rather than just like, oh, this one tastes really good. It really is groups like you here on the panel that take this to the highest level of geekery, if you will, that allows it to exist. I said it a couple weeks ago, the fact that we were going to a Chinese restaurant with a friend of mine, and he wanted I had just given him a pivot. Jolly Roger had sent me a couple pivots from the Puffco, which this thing is fucking amazing, man. I can't say enough about it. So I gave my older buddy one, and he's like, "Oh, I have nothing to smoke out of it. I just have traditional hash." And I said, "Well, dude, there's a store right across the street." And we walked into it, and we were able to buy a gram of my friend Caitlin, who has been on Hash Church many times, from High Fidelity, and it was a gram of her. I think it was Rainbow Driver. And man, like to be able to just walk into a store and buy a product like that. Now it's far and few between. Not every product in the store is like that. I happen to know High Fidelity. I know who their growers are at Woody Nelson. I know their story, and I know the people from 20 plus years. A lot of them come from the gray market. So it was just I felt very, I mean, listen, I'm always going to be able to find resin, even when it was highly illegal. I had beautiful bubble hash in my possession, but it's for everyone else who doesn't have those connections that can now just walk into a store. And maybe it's not the best price, and maybe there's still not the greatest selection. But like I said last week to Etienne, we do have to celebrate our wins when we get them, and that is still a celebration, a win.
Did anybody else get cat and mouth just watching that stirring going on? I mean, it was gorgeous.
It's even worse for me. I'm not even going to tell you what happened to me, but it's inappropriate.
Uh-oh.
Inappropriate
You need to
church
talk to
talk.
Miss Bubble Man now.
I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I got 15 minutes left here in the show, so anything you guys want to hit on that we missed, or anything that you guys want to talk about before we finish off? It was truly a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed it. It's really nice.
The legal update, our my Veterans Action Council are that is fighting to get into the DEA. Our appeal has been received, so we're in the midst of securing legal counsel, and it's a specialized law, appellate law. And so we're hoping to get a submittal here soon, and then we have until we were given till the 10th of January, and of course the DEA hearings start on the 13th. So it may or may not have an effect, don't know, but we're trying to be number 26 again to discuss Schedule 5 as well as descheduling outright. So we're just doing our best to keep the discussion in the fight and in the media's eyes. Currently, we have 23 articles that have been out from the Washington Post and around, just discussing this and making us aware, because nobody else is discussing Schedule 5, or as we're talking outright, descheduling. So Wade and I, via Veterans Action Council, are doing our best to fight the good fight, and hopefully next Hash Church will have even better news and the ability to, change the world.
So what kind of leverage, Tin, do you think it gives you with the DEA and the whole valor thing that you guys are veterans?
Well, one, they taught us to fight, so we don't know how to stop fighting, for one. So we're going to continue to do that. Two, we believe that, if they can have somebody come in and argue the point that it should stay in Schedule 1, then we should come out and be able to argue Schedule 5, which of course the judge kind of mocked us about, but we challenged via his challenge. Actually, the administrative law judge for the DEA gave us these crumb trails for appeal. He not only told us there was a possibility of appeal, he went and found the case specifically for us to file under. So, it's not necessarily championing, but he was very helpful. But because we are an organization or a group, even though we're volunteers, we have to have a lawyer now. But if you were an individual, you could file for because we are all volunteers. We have no payment. We have no hierarchy in the Veterans Action Council. We're a working group. We're very unique that way. So we were looking at, signing regarding financial hardships, but because the court made us aware you are a group, you cannot do that via another case law. So right now, Michael Krowitz is trying to secure counsel for us. Do I feel that veterans have a better voice or not? Well, we represent a specific culture, and the United Nations and others recognizes culture. Even though cannabis is its own culture, veterans are considered its own subsection of a subculture because it is its own culture. So we are using, that as best as we can, because we have, friends all over. But I don't think our voice matters any more or less per se than anybody else who's testifying. But we are using our veteran status to do our best to clarify the message that Schedule 3 is not what we're settling for. We prefer, if we have to be on scheduling, Schedule 5. And if we have to do anything, let's do descheduling outright. Because, at Berkeley Patient Group, I've been selling over the counter for 25 plus years now. So the wheels haven't come off. The world hasn't gone to pot. The place hasn't, fallen into disrepair. We did that on our own with our own representative democracy. It wasn't cannabis who did that. So we're just trying our best to use our voice to amplify others' voices. And because no one else is discussing descheduling or Schedule 5, we'll carry that battle flag and we'll fly it high as long as we can. And if we're able to get in, then Michael will testify and explain why we as veterans are harmed specifically. We are just pointing out a specific on why we feel we are specifically a representative group that has standing, right? That's the only reason you can testify if they feel you have standing. Project Sam and a lot of the antithesis who are currently signed up aren't going to be harmed by Schedule 1. They just want to perpetuate the drug war. We don't want any more of that. So I already got on my soapbox there, but we're going to do our best as we can to make everybody aware, because once Schedule 3 happens, the discussion changes forever. And we want to have put the hat in the ring that we're past just a simple discussion.
Well, good on you, brother. Always, oh, you've been fighting the good fight for a very long time. Someone's got to do it. And like you said, someone with standing. They're not going to listen to me. I'm just up in Canada or in the US's 51st state.
Oh, that's hilarious. Hey, come here.
With
What's
Governor
your dog's
Trudeau.
name? You have to tell us your dog's name.
Oh, he's not my dog. He's a friend's dog. I'm just kind of the day caretaker when they go to work.
Did
So,
anyone get a little bit of a
Teddy,
Monty
he's a cutie. He's a
Python,
really good boy.
Monty Python vibe from that? He's not my dog. Oh, does your dog bite? Does your dog bite? No, monsieur. No,
That's my
monsieur.
dog.
I thought you said your dog didn't bite. That is not my dog, monsieur.
Peter
So
Sellers.
good. Dude,
Pink
Peter
Panther,
Sellers
wasn't it?
was the best. Yeah, it was the Pink Panther, exactly. For those youngins out there that don't know about the Pink Panther with Peter Sellers, you've got some enjoyment ahead of you. Eat some
Oh yeah,
edibles,
go
take some
watch that.
dabs, go watch that
He's
shit. It's
hilarious.
so good. It's so classic. The guy that plays the police chief that he just drives into the mental ward every movie. It's so good. Makes me think of my old man. Used to watch Peter Sellers movies with him. Another good one is The Party, where he doesn't play Inspector Clouseau, but he plays this Indian gentleman, and it is also very good.
Peter Sellers is classic. There's a story with him and the drummer from Led Zeppelin, John Bonham, in a restaurant, just causing absolute mass hysteria, trashing the place, throwing food everywhere. He was a genius comedian. Peter Sellers was. All of his stuff is fantastic.
Yeah, it was definitely from a very specific time, but it was also very specifically timeless.
Few Saturdays left before the end of 2024. I mean,
That's
Sundays
true.
left.
That's true,
Sunday.
Johnny B.
I
That's
got two
true.
Sundays left, and look at how far, and like really celebrate how far we've come just in this 1 year. It's like, wow, man. I just looked behind me. It's like, yeah, there's only 2 Sundays left, right? We got the 22nd and the
Well,
20th.
what we see behind you is your book, and congratulations on making Amazon. What was it, bestsellers list there? Congratulations, Johnny B. Look at you, renowned author now.
Yeah, it's it's if I wrote it down. And I said I was wanting to publish a book. I want to become a #1 bestseller about the story about how cannabis helped save my life, right? And was a huge part of my recovery and the people and it came on that day. It was the same day I date with Desi when I wrote it down. It was the senior leader for Tony, and my book became a #1 bestseller. I can't believe it happened on that day, and I did it 4 years later. So, you know what? It's important to get your information out there and do what you love, and make sure you share it with the people who can benefit from it. And that's what we all do here. Everybody here is sharing their passion and their knowledge. Every one of you guys, it's
Hey, listen, I was out in BC recently. I went and stayed with Johnny for a few days, and I was so impressed by what he's got going on and just the hustle and the AI things that he's doing, and you know the push-ups and everything. He's really
basically built this for us. So this would come out with a 3-5-7 kind of program things, and it's gonna really help anybody in the industry guide them and use it as an intelligence to help. So I've had a lot of fun being able to work on this, as Ryan knows. So I look forward to being able to offer you
yeah.
some
We talked earlier about what AI can and can't do. It's important to remember this is just the beginning, right? It's kind of like think of like what Atari was when it was like, whatever, 16-bit computing or whatever. Like we've really, this thing is just going to get better and better and better. And don't be afraid of these tools. Learn to use them. There's so many people that are just like so judgmental about what they are, and they're scared of how they're going to get replaced. These things aren't going to replace us. They're going to make our lives better. And someone said it earlier about like prompt engineering, right? Like with my AI, we're doing the training on it, and the results, like some people come in, I've handed the testing out, the beta out to a few people, and some people come in and they ask like silly questions like, who's the greatest cannabis breeder of all time? And then you get other people that are asking about doubled haploids and really advanced techniques, and like the quality of the response is directly proportional to the quality of the question. So if you use it for silly questions, you're going to get silly answers. But if you use it for really intelligent questions, you'll be blown away by what these things can do. And they're not replacing you in the captain's seat, but they're going to be a really helpful co-pilot. And I really I'm really impressed with how they are so far. And you know, start getting to use one. We're going to build one for Sam. We're going to get a Sam clone. And yeah, these things are going to be some pretty cool tools for the community to use. I think people will be impressed.
Most important part here, loop, and that's going to be the biggest part of what we have here, and being able to use human in the loop. And with like it comes down to prompt engineering, it's a lot of fun, and it can just show certain ways to personalize your GTP first, so it actually starts guiding you along, and have specific things for that. I'm willing to give it to anybody because it really just gives you the context and the contrast of what it can do for you. And then you can start basically when you open up a paid account, it becomes your guide. And over time, it gets used to everything that you put into it. And I treat it as rhinos. I named mine Q from with Star Trek, right? I was like, I got a Q now because it made it fun. So I have dialogue with my GTP, and then I create other, like if you go to a doctor, if you got something wrong, they send you to a specialist, especially if they send you to a surgeon. So that's basically what I've been creating is specialists in different areas within the industry, taking my knowledge and building custom agents to so which is say like a one mark I did one for resin master. I also have one for LED lights and stuff like that. So you build them for that specific area that you want to have a topic on, and then you get more information. When you go to a restaurant, you don't have the person sitting your dinner, right? And if you're in a five-star restaurant, you can have a sous chef, you can have someone doing your desserts, everything. It's the same with AI. You have to start individually looking at that and how it can benefit you, and where it's going to benefit you with anything. We all learn different sectors of what we want to do in life. It's the same thing. Now you just have a super intelligence guiding you in each individual sector that you want to work in. Like fuck me, like oh wow, like anything you want to learn and what you're passionate about is going to help you tremendously. So
No,
let's
they're as good as you train them to be, right? So I'd love to see Brian, Best Friend Farms making one for the hash. Like they're incredible. Like they really are. If you take and you start feeding it with the information that you have, they learn, and then they're just, they're tools to just share and expand. They're incredible. I'd get on them.
created guys is I've made them so they're super intelligent, so it's learning at every second, so it's always evolving, right? So the more that you use it, the more evolved it gives you more context and contrast to what you're looking at. So yeah, it's amazing how these tools are actually now getting more and more smarter so they can benefit us so we can grow more faster with the vision that we all have. Remember that we have the vision, human in the we have now a super intelligence to help us get through government bullshit.
I got to split, guys. I got to take these kiddos to hockey. So,
Dude, thank you.
nice
Thank
chatting. Thanks
Awesome.
for having me. It was great to
Yeah.
see you, Kevin. And
Thank
Me too.
you.
Brian,
Thank you so much. It was
wearing
great to
that
see you
hat.
guys.
Thanks
Appreciate you.
everyone for coming out. I appreciate all of you, Kev. Appreciate you, Dr. Mark, Wade, Best Friend Farms, Johnny B, Skunkman Sam, Etienne Fontaine, Colin, whose birthday it is today, as well as Mojave. Happy birthday to the both of you guys. And may the full melt bless your bowl sooner than later, everyone that's watching. See you next week. Peace.